My name is Ethan Barr, and on day one of the apocalypse I did the stupidest thing in the history of survival. I found the most beautiful girl on campus chained to a pipe in a cold room, half-turned, begging me to end her, and instead of running I opened my own hand and fed her my blood. I thought I was buying a dying queen 5 peaceful minutes. What I actually bought was the boss of the entire horde. A monster who folds fire doors in half, introduces me to other zombies as her property, and rations my own blood back to me like a wine collector with one very special bottle. She counts my heartbeats when she thinks I'm asleep. Every morning she pins me against the nearest wall and drags her lips along my neck so the whole campus knows exactly who I belong to. The shameful part, the part one will deny in front of any court that survives civilization, is that some percentage of me started looking forward to it. Let me back up to the morning the world ended, because I spent that morning strapped to a chair with a needle in my arm, which turned out to be the safest place in the entire state. Here are the 3 facts you need about me. Fact 1, I was broke in a way that had layers to it, like an onion made of overdraft fees. Fact 2, I was invisible. Professors passed me in the hallway and their eyes slid off me like I was a fire extinguisher. 3 years on this campus and the girl at the coffee cart still called me Evan. Fact 3, and this is the important one. My blood type is O negative. Universal donor. My blood works in anybody. The plasma center paid me $35 a visit plus a cookie, which made my blood the only thing I owned that anyone had ever wanted. So there I was, week 17 of my donation streak, reclined in the chair with a tube in my elbow, watching my most valuable asset leave my body at a discount. The nurse had just told me my iron looked great. I remember feeling proud of my iron. That was when the screaming started on the floor above us. Not movie screaming. Real screaming has a wet edge to it, and it stops in a way you feel in your teeth. Nurse looked up. I looked up. Then something came through the ceiling tile 2 chairs over, and the something was wearing a lab coat and most of a face. The nurse ran left. The thing in the lab coat chased her, because running is an invitation, and I did the only thing my body knew how to do in that chair. I sat perfectly still and finished my donation like a coward with a completion streak. I wish I could tell you I fought my way out of that building. The truth is I unhooked myself, pressed the little cotton ball into my elbow, grabbed 2 bags of someone's abandoned juice, and hid in the supply closet until dark. I am not the main character of an action movie. I am the guy the action movie happens near. When I finally cracked the door, the infected owned the campus, and I got my first 2 lessons about them through the lobby glass, fast. Lesson 1, they keep their habits. A dead girl in workout clothes jogged past the window in a perfect straight line, turned at the corner, and jogged back. A tour guide shuffled backward across the quad, gesturing at buildings, leading no one. Lesson 2 was about hierarchy, and I learned it watching the student council get eaten on the steps of the admin building. The horde took them in order of importance. President first, then the 2 vice presidents, then treasury. Even the apocalypse respected our org chart. Made it across campus in the dark using my one superpower, which was that I moved like a man who had never once been noticed by anybody and saw no reason to start now. Zombies track motion and sound and confidence. I have none of those. I ghosted between parked cars while a dead linebacker ate a scooter, and I want to be clear, the scooter was not attached to anyone. He just had unfinished business with it. My plan was the biology building. Thick doors, card locks, and a vending machine on the 2nd floor that I happened to know took dented dollars. 50 feet from the entrance my plan died, because the doors were already busted inward, and from somewhere inside, down in the lab wing, I heard a voice. A human voice. A girl. Counting. 48. 47. You know how in horror movies the audience yells at the guy, "Don't go toward the creepy counting in the dark science building." The audience is right. The audience is always right. I went toward the creepy counting. The lab wing had a cold room at the end, one of those walk-in refrigerators for samples, with a steel door and a little square window. The counting was coming from behind it. I wiped the frost with my sleeve and looked through the glass, and my heart did something medically interesting. Vivienne Hale was chained to a pipe inside my refrigerator. Vivienne Hale needs introducing, because Campus Queen doesn't cover it. Whatever Vivienne Hale ordered at the coffee cart sold out by noon, because whatever she ordered became the thing to order. She moved through this school like the hallways had been poured around her walking route. Freshman girls took notes on her ponytail. She'd turned the sorority system into something between a government and a religion, and she ran it with a smile that could restructure your whole personality from across a room. We had exactly one interaction in 3 years. Freshman year, she knocked her iced coffee off a table and it exploded across my shoes, and she looked me in the eyes and said, "Sorry, Ethan." That's the whole story. That's everything that ever happened between us. But she alone, in this entire institution, had ever gotten my name right on the first try, and I am telling you now, a man's heart is a cheap, cheap machine. Mine was purchased in full with 2 syllables. Anyway. There she was, chained up in the cold, in the shredded remains of what had been a very good white dress, with a bandage on her shoulder soaked through black. Black is not a color blood is supposed to be. Her skin was the gray of an old phone screen and the veins in her throat were dark and climbing, and she was counting backward, out loud, with perfect diction. Her own pulse. She was counting her own pulse down, because she knew the number where a person stops and the other thing starts. I opened the door. Do not ask me why. The frost rolled out around my ankles, and she lifted her head, and her eyes were still hers. Brown, sharp, and doing math on me. Ethan, she said. 2 for 2 on the name. Even dying, even turning, she was better at knowing me than the entire university. Then she said, and I'm quoting this exactly, there's a scalpel in the second drawer. Cut my throat before I get ugly. Those were her priorities. Not, save me. Not, find help. She had accepted the throat cutting as settled business and moved on to scheduling it around her looks. I asked what happened to her shoulder, which was a stupid question, and she told me anyway. Her sorority sisters happened. When the bite started going bad, her whole court had walked her here, told her they loved her, and cuffed her to a pipe with a set of handcuffs that one of them just had. I asked why one of them just had handcuffs. She looked at me with what was left of her patience and said, Chelsea. Like that was a complete explanation. Honestly, it kind of was. 41, she said, in the middle of her own sentence. She was still counting underneath everything, and that, more than the black bandage, was what undid me. She wasn't crying. Her hands weren't shaking. The most popular girl in the history of this campus was dying alone in a refrigerator, organizing her own death like it was an event she was hosting, and the only guest who showed up was the guy from the coffee incident. I got the scalpel out of the drawer. My hands were shaking plenty. And I couldn't do it. Not because I was brave, and not because I had a plan. I couldn't do it because she'd said my name right, twice, in the dark, while dying, and my entire nervous system had apparently been waiting 3 years to die for this woman on the strength of one apologized coffee. She saw me hesitate, and she did something I will never forget. She rolled her eyes. Turning into a corpse, 30-some heartbeats on the clock, and she found the energy to be disappointed in me. Ethan, she said, I have maybe 1 minute of being me. Don't spend it watching. And that's when my one asset came to mind. Because here's the thing about spending every week of your life in a donation chair. When a crisis hits, other men think of weapons. I think of blood. They told us in orientation that O negative goes into anybody. Anybody was about to be redefined, sure, but the infection was in her blood, and my blood was the only thing I had ever owned that worked in other people, and she was at 39 and dropping. You cannot fact-check an idea like that at that speed. You can only do it or not do it. I dragged the scalpel across my left palm, and I held my hand over her mouth, and I let it run. I expected her to turn her head away. She was Vivienne Hale and I was a guy bleeding on her. That's a Tuesday for campus security. She did not turn her head away. Her lips were freezing. That's the first thing. Cold like the room, cold like a canned drink, pressed into my palm. And then her hands came up and closed around my wrist, both of them, and let me tell you something about her grip. I've had medical professionals strap pressure cuffs to that arm. Nothing has ever held my arm like that. She drank from my hand the way freshmen drink free lattes at orientation, eyes up, watching me the entire time, and I stood there in a refrigerator with my pulse in her mouth, thinking 2 thoughts in parallel. Thought 1. The black was fading out of the veins in her throat. Actually fading, actually retreating, like watching ink run in reverse. Thought 2. $35 and a cookie. 17 weeks of $35 and a cookie, and no one at the clinic ever once held my wrist like it was the last warm thing in the world. Somewhere around the time her skin shifted from gray to porcelain, I remembered that I also enjoy having blood, and I gave the medical world's weakest cough and said, okay, easy, some of that is load-bearing. She detached from my palm slowly, with an unhurried little pull at the end that ran a full voltage reading down my spine, licked her lips like a critic, and looked up at me. Her eyes had changed, still brown. But something in the depth of them had a second layer now, a shine at the back, like an animal's eyes in headlights. Then she looked at my bleeding palm, and her face did something cold and offended, and she said the first official sentence of her new life. Who allowed you to spill mine? Not yours. Not thank you. Mine. She was looking at the blood dripping off my little finger onto the floor of the cold room the way you'd look at a stranger burning your mail. I said something extremely masculine, along the lines of, well, technically, it's from my personal arm. She didn't answer. She stood up. The handcuffs did not so much break as give up. She just brought her wrists apart and the chain popped like a birthday streamer, and she rose out of that corner in one motion, taller than I remembered, moving wrong. Not zombie wrong. Expensive wrong. Like her joints had been upgraded and the rest of the world was now in slow motion out of respect. She was fully between me and the door before I saw her cross the room. My back found the steel shelving all by itself. And then Vivienne Hale, resurrected homecoming royalty, leaned in and smelled me. Not a polite sniff. A full audit. She started at my collar, ran her nose up the side of my throat with her lips just barely off my skin, up past my jaw, into my hair, breathing me in slow and deep. One cold hand flat on my chest, right on top of my heartbeat, which at that point was playing double time and lying about nothing. I stood very still, the way the pamphlets tell you to do with bears, and asked if we could maybe circle back to the part where she wasn't going to eat me. Quiet, she said, into my neck. I'm reading. Reading what? I said. You, she said. Cover to cover. And then she pulled back just enough to look at me, and there was frost in her hair and my blood on her lip, and she was without competition the most beautiful and most upsetting thing I had ever seen, and she said, "Your heart is very loud, Ethan. It's distracting. I could hear it through the door before you opened it." That's how I found out why the counting had stopped when I walked into the lab wing. She'd stopped counting hers. She'd switched to counting mine. Here's the part where any functioning survivor grabs the juice bags and runs. What I actually did was follow her out of the cold room, because it turns out that when a recently deceased goddess tells you to stay where she can hear you, your legs file the paperwork on their own. In the hallway we met our first zombie. Kid in a hoodie, string of drool, dragging one shoe. He got one look at Vivienne, made a sound I can only describe as an apology, and backed himself around the corner like a delivery truck. I found out why on the stairs, when she stopped on the landing, turned around, and looked at my throat with an expression I recognized from every group project of my life. The expression of a woman fixing something the last person did wrong. "You smell like an open bag of groceries," she said, in the tone of a girl who'd found something the last person did wrong and intended to redo it herself. "Everything on this campus is starving, and you're walking around smelling like the last hot meal in the world. It won't do." I asked what she was going to do about it, which is a sentence I need to learn to stop saying, because what she did about it was walk me backward into the stairwell wall, slide one arm around my waist like we'd practiced it, and press her cheek against my jaw. Then she turned her head, slow, deliberate, and ran her lips from my collarbone up the full length of my neck. Not a kiss. Firmer than a kiss. She was wiping herself onto me the way a cat writes its name on furniture, throat, jaw, the collar of my shirt, breathing slow, taking her time, one cold hand spread out over my spine, and I would like to say I endured this with dignity, but honestly, my knees turned in a coupon. "There," she said, stepping back and looking me over like a finished essay. "Now you smell claimed." "Claimed," I said. My voice picked that exact moment to come out half an octave up, like it was going through a second puberty. "Mine is in your veins," she said, as if she were explaining parking rules. "Now it's on your skin too, where the rest of them can read it. Anything on this campus that has a nose will know that eating you means answering to me." She paused, and added, with the first small smile of the entire apocalypse, "It wears off in about a day. So we're going to have to do that every morning." And I remember thinking, clear as a bell, standing in that stairwell with my heart hammering out a drum solo against her handprint. Oh no. This is going to be the best worst thing that has ever happened to me. We came out of the biology building at midnight into a campus that had rearranged itself around a food chain. Fires in trash cans. A car folded around the bronze statue of our founder. And zombies everywhere, dozens, in bathrobes and band uniforms and one full mascot costume, and all of them, down to the last corpse, stopped what they were doing when Vivienne stepped onto the quad. I mean stopped. Mid-shuffle, mid-groan, one of them mid-bite into a couch cushion. Every dead head on that lawn swung toward her like she was the season finale. Whole quad went silent, 40 corpses holding their breath they didn't have, and I stood behind her with my juice bags doing the math on how fast I could get back inside a refrigerator. She looked out over them the exact way she used to look over a packed Welcome Week assembly. Chin up. Unhurried. Then she said, not loud, not magic, just with that voice that had been reorganizing this campus for years before she died, "Go back to what you were doing and breathe through your mouths. He's not on the menu." And the quad, the entire dead quad, went back to shuffling. The mascot bowed. I swear on my overdrafts, the mascot bowed. She started walking, and the horde peeled apart ahead of her in 2 clean waves, and I walked through the middle of that in her wake, close enough to smell the cold coming off her shoulders. Look. I had questions. Whether she was leading them or they just recognized management. Whether the thing in my blood that fixed her had made her their queen or just their tax bracket. But mostly, walking that gauntlet of dead classmates who were all, every one of them, very carefully not looking at my throat, I had one thought on a loop. Every morning, she said every morning. We were halfway across the quad when she stopped, tilted her head at a sound I hadn't heard yet, and said the sentence that ended the first night of the apocalypse and started everything else. There are still warm ones in the freshman dorm, she said. Come on. If anyone's going to keep you alive properly, I'll need staff. The sound she'd heard turned out to be a vending machine being murdered. Found it around the corner of the freshman dorm, tipped over on top of a very large person who was very much alive under there, pinned like a butterfly, with one arm out the side working a candy bar toward his mouth. Trapped under 200 kilos of machine at the end of the world, and he was snacking. That was how we met Marcus Grady. Offensive line, 3rd year, size of a garden shed, sweetness of a golden retriever that believes every siren is for him. Vivienne lifted the machine off him with one hand, and I need to describe the sequence of his reaction, because it set the tone for everything Marcus. First he saw the machine rise, then he saw the dead campus queen holding it. Then he screamed, high and clean, a really impressive tone for a man that size. And then, mid-scream, he recognized her, and the scream turned into, wait, Vivienne Hale from the involvement fair? She set the machine down and said, you're the one who carried the water coolers. He lit up like she'd knighted him. You remembered, he said. Dead, glowing slightly wrong in the dark, capable of folding him into an envelope, and his takeaway was that she remembered him from the involvement fair. Marcus's entire threat assessment system ran on whether people were nice to him. It was going to get him killed someday, but not today, because today the apex predator of the campus had helped him up and therefore was, per Marcus law, his friend for life. He fell in next to me as we walked and whispered, in the way large men whisper, which is to say at full volume, dude. Is she safe? And Vivienne answered without turning around. No, she said. But he is. I'd love to tell you the freshman dorm welcomed us with open arms. What actually happened was a flashlight in my eyes and a kid on the 2nd floor balcony aiming a lacrosse stick at us like a rifle, which tells you our overall tactical situation. Barricade crew had furniture stacked in the lobby doors and a rotating watch, and the kid running it all was an RA named Trent Wexler, a wiry guy in a reflective vest who had been waiting his whole life for a disaster that would finally make him important. Trent took one look at Vivienne, glowing faintly, flanked by a shy horde at a respectful distance, and declared through the door that no infected were coming inside, per protocol. He said per protocol the way other men say abracadabra. I watched Vivienne handle him, and this is the moment I understood what my blood had actually done. It hadn't just brought her back. It had brought all of her back, every social weapon, every ounce of the person who ran this campus, and then bolted it onto something that could hear heartbeats through walls. She didn't threaten him. She stood under the balcony, looked up at 40 terrified faces in the windows, and started with names. Priya, 3rd floor, she said. You ran my bake sale 2 years ago and never dropped a tray. Deshawn, you fixed my microphone at the involvement fair with a coin. Katie, are you still keeping everyone's medication straight, because as of tonight that's a paid position. Then she tipped her head at the dead lawn behind her, at the shape standing politely in the dark. Everything out here is enrolled now, she said. It answers to me. Nothing wearing my rules touches this building, and the first thing that tries will be made into an example loud enough to study by. Food and a pharmacy run get organized Thursday. All I need from you is what I've always needed from this campus. Attendance, and a little faith. Trent leaned over the railing with his flashlight and made his counter move, because a man with a vest has to. Say we believe you, he said. Then the dead stay past the parking lot line. All of them, no exceptions, and the second one of them crosses it, this door seals and you and your boyfriend can room in the science building. And we keep our own watch, all night, every night. I don't trust luck, and I don't trust pretty speeches. Done, said Vivienne, before he'd finished the sentence. Keep your watch. Keep your door. Everything on your side of the glass is yours, Trent. Everything past the parking lot is me. Then she looked up at him, unhurried, and added, and he's not my boyfriend. He's more important than that. The barricade opened in 4 minutes. People actually applauded, which tells you less about her speech and more about how badly 40 people wanted somebody, anybody, to be in charge of the dark. Day 1 of the apocalypse, and she'd won an election nobody had announced. Inside, they had a first aid corner set up in the common room, and that's where Dana Cho enters this story. Med student, 3rd year, the person who had already organized the dorm's medicine into labeled bins by hour 6 of the end of the world, sleeves rolled, zero romance in her soul, thank God, you'll see why that mattered. She took one look at my palm, which I'd been hiding in my pocket, and pulled it out by the wrist like it was county property. Scalpel, she said, reading the cut. Clean edge. Recent. Self-inflicted. Long story, I said. She was already flushing it with saline. And that's when I felt the temperature drop behind me. Not a metaphor. The actual air. Vivienne had crossed the common room in silence and was standing at my shoulder, watching Dana hold my open hand, and when I turned to look at her face, her eyes weren't on me. They were on Dana's fingers, on my wrist, on the little bloom of pink in the gauze. Doing inventory. Dana, to her permanent credit, glanced up at the resurrected queen looming over her patient, said, "I'm going to need you to not hover," and went back to work. There was a silence with real weather in it. Then Vivienne said, in a voice I hadn't heard yet, "Pleasant the way a frozen lake is flat, when you're done, the dressing goes in the fire." Not the trash. The fire. The gauze, Dana said, not looking up. "You want me to burn the gauze?" "Everything with him on it burns," Vivienne said. "Unless you'd like every nose on this campus to learn what I know, which is that the boy attached to that hand is the single best-smelling thing left alive in this city." She said it flat, like a safety regulation, and the whole common room got very interested in the floor tiles. And I sat there while a med student wrapped my hand, being publicly declared delicious in front of 40 strangers by the most beautiful dead girl in the state, and Marcus, from the snack table, gave me 2 thumbs up. That night they gave me a bunk in a second-floor room, and I lay there listing the day's events to the ceiling like a crazy person doing accounting. Outbreak. Refrigerator. Scalpel. Feeding. Claiming. I'd almost talked myself into the idea that the claiming was a one-time medical event when the window slid open, because of course the window slid open. We were on the 2nd floor and she does not use stairs when there's a wall available. She came in without a sound and stood by the bunk, moonlight on her, still in the ruined white dress, and I did the mental math on screaming and gave up on it. She looked at me the way you look at a fridge you're deciding to open. "Your heart's been loud for an hour," she said. "It's keeping me up." "I don't control it," I said. "It's an involuntary muscle. It's the one thing in my life I'm allowed to not control." She considered this. Then she pulled the desk chair to the edge of the bunk, sat down, and lifted my wrist off the blanket like something she'd lent me and was checking for damage. 2 cold fingers settled on my pulse and stayed there. "Then I'll wait until it slows down," she said. And that, I understood, was non-negotiable, so I lay there rigid as lumber with a dead beauty queen holding my heartbeat between her fingers, eyes closed, listening to it the way people listen to vinyl. The cold of her fingertips crept up my arm in a slow, frankly criminal way, and weirdly, terrifyingly, the pulse under them obeyed her. Right at the edge of sleep I heard her murmur something, half to herself, and it followed me down into the dark. 61, she said. 60. Good. Slower means staying. I woke up at dawn because the light changed, and the light changed because something was blocking the window. She was already up. Standing at the glass, absolutely still, looking down at the parking lot with her head at the tilted angle that I was learning to read as incoming problems. I asked what it was, and she stepped aside so I could see. Standing at the dorm's fence line, dead center, in the gray light, was a zombie in a blazer. Ironed. Gold buttons. Hair combed with visible product, on a corpse. Stood there with perfect posture behind our fence, unmoving, and in its 2 gray hands, held out in front of it like a wine delivery, was a single long-stemmed white rose and a cream-colored envelope. Vivienne stared down at it, and something rolled through the horde outside, a low sound passing body to body around the block like a rumor with a spine. Her jaw set, and I watched frost creep out from where her hand rested on the sill. "Who's it from?" I asked. "Look at the blazer," she said. "Gold crest, student government cut. I approved the order for those myself, sophomore year. And the rose is white. He sent white roses every time he won something. To the team, if it was sports. To me, if it was anything else." "I don't follow," I said. "The student body president," she said. I said, "I watched the student council get eaten on day 1. President first." "I know," she said, and her voice had something new in it, something that made every hair on my arm stand up and stay up. We're about to learn what he did after that. And then she looked down at the rose again and said, quietly, to the glass, more to herself than to me, the sentence I should have written down and framed, because it was the mission statement for everything that came next. He doesn't get to send invitations to what's mine. We went down to the fence, because apparently we were the kind of people now who walked toward the formally dressed corpse. Up close, the blazer zombie was worse. It had a name tag. It had cologne on, over the rot, which is a smell I can only describe as a funeral inside a duty-free shop. And when Vivienne stopped in front of it, the thing bowed at the waist, opened its mouth, and spoke. I hadn't known they could speak. Judging by the way the entire fence line of our own zombies flinched backward, neither had they. The voice came out in pieces, like a recording chewed by a tape deck. Rex Calloway, it said. President. Requests the honor. Vivienne Hale. Homecoming. The stadium. 8 days. Paused, wet gears turning, and then it delivered the last line with the smile of a man who had written it personally and thought it was excellent. Bring your little juice box. I said, hey. It said nothing. It was a messenger, and the message was over, so it simply stood there holding the rose while Vivienne read the cream envelope, which contained the same invitation in beautiful cursive, because Rex had sent it in print and audio. A man who formats his threats twice. Here's what I knew about Rex Calloway before that morning. Student body president, jawline like a recruitment poster, the kind of guy who shook your hand and looked over your shoulder for someone better in one single motion. He and Vivienne had been the campus power couple in every photo that ever mattered, prom king energy welded to her queen. What I found out at the fence, from her, in a voice with no bottom, was the rest of it. They were never together, she said. He announced us at a gala freshman year, put his hand on my waist for the photo, and spent 3 years telling anyone I dated that I was taken. I spent 3 years untelling it. He called it a long game. He liked to say we were inevitable. And I watched the president get eaten, I said. Day 1. On the steps. First. No, she said, folding the envelope once, in half, through the wax seal, with her thumb. You watched him get bitten. Everyone gets a turn at dying, Ethan. His just took. He turned smart in about an hour, and then he ate his own counsel on those steps, one office at a time, because that's the fastest way for their kind to grow. He always did love a promotion. Their kind, it turned out, was the other road up the mountain. My blood had evolved her one gift at a time and left her mind intact. Rex's road was appetite. Eat enough of your own, especially the fresh-turned, and something climbs back on inside you, crooked, hungry, and convinced it earned everything. 2 towers on one campus. Hers ran on donation. His ran on consumption. If you want to know how the world ends, it ends the way it started, with 2 student leaders who cannot both be in charge of the same lawn. Vivienne handed the envelope back to the messenger, and then she took the rose, considered it, and closed her fist. Frost cracked down the stem, and the whole flower went to pieces like sugar glass. Tell your president, she said, that I said maybe. Maybe, the thing gargled. Maybe, she said, is what he gets. He'll understand. He's fluent in me. Messenger bowed and creaked away up the road, and Marcus, who had watched all of this from the fence with a bat he had absolutely no intention of using, asked the question of the hour. So are we going to homecoming, or? 8 days, she said, walking back toward the dorm. We have 8 days to make this campus too expensive to invade. And someone find me a dress that doesn't have my death on it. I want to tell you about that week and a half, because the Apocalypse Handbook skipped this part. Nobody warns you that the end of the world, properly managed, becomes a student government job. By day 3, Vivienne had the horde organized. I don't mean subdued, I mean organized. She held office hours on the quad every morning, 8 sharp, seated on the admin building steps while a line of the dead formed politely down the walkway with their complaints, and I know how that sounds, but the dead have complaints. 2 roommates who had eaten each other's arms had a property dispute about a couch. She ruled on it like a judge. The couch went to the one who could still carry it. She sorted them by what they'd been. The track team ran her perimeter, endless loops around campus, tireless, actually happier, I think, than in life, because now nobody made them taper. The a cappella group became her alarm system, staked out on rooftops, because it turns out a dead tenor holds a note forever, and there is no sound on this earth that will empty your bladder faster than a sustained B-flat in the dark, meaning something's coming. The rule was one rule. Nothing enrolled eats anything warm. She said enrolled with a straight face. She'd stand on the steps in that ruined white dress, hair moving in wind that wasn't there, and tell a crowd of corpses, this campus has a zero-tolerance policy. And the corpses would groan back in that low rolling wave, and Marcus, beside me, whispered, dude, I think that's their fight song. The humans took longer than the dead. Trent had a clipboard now. He'd inventoried the dorm's food down to the ketchup packets, which, fine, useful, but he'd also started a list titled Assets and Liabilities, and the Whisper campaign wrote itself. Item 1, the dorm depends on the goodwill of one monster. Item 2, the monster's goodwill depends on one guy. Item 3, nobody has explained what's so special about the guy. He wasn't wrong, which is the annoying kind of enemy to have. Only 4 people on Earth knew what my blood did, me, Vivienne, Dana, because you cannot hide anything from a woman who owns the dorm's only stethoscope, and Marcus, because he'd walked in on a feeding, which we will get to. Everyone else just knew the Queen of the Dead kept a boy the way other monarchs keep a falcon, and that every morning, in the stairwell, with witnesses, she wrote her name on my neck. Oh, the mornings had witnesses now. Privacy died around day 4. She wasn't ashamed, she was the opposite of ashamed. She'd back me into the stairwell wall at 8:15 with the freshman filing past to breakfast, take my jaw in one cold hand, tilt my head over like a barber, and do her slow, thorough, deeply unnecessary tour of my throat, lips just barely dragging, one knee parked between mine, and then she'd straighten my collar after, pat it flat, and say something administrative like, "There, all set, drink water." Freshmen learned to schedule around it. Marcus called it the morning announcements. Dana timed it once out of scientific interest and told me, with a straight clinical face, that it was getting 11 seconds longer per day, and that at the current rate of growth I had about a month before it legally became a marriage. And the feedings. Twice a week, her math, not mine. She'd found a hematology textbook in the science library, read it in one night the way other people check a menu, and now she knew my blood volume, my recovery rate, and my iron needs better than I did. She scheduled me. There is a specific feeling, and no one has built the word for it yet, of watching a dead girl write your name into a planner under a heading she will not let you read. The second feeding, day 3, is the one Marcus walked in on, and honestly, I understand what he thought he saw. She'd set it up in the little study room off the second floor hall. Desk lamp with a shirt over it for the light. 2 chairs pulled knee to knee. She'd looted an actual silver letter opener from the dean's office and boiled it, because she had opinions now about my scalpel technique, and when I sat down she took my forearm in both hands and turned it over, soft side up, like something she'd purchased and intended to keep box fresh. Cut she made was small and precise and I barely felt it. What I felt was everything after. She drank from my wrist without hurry, eyes closed this time, thumb resting on my pulse point like a bookmark, and the room got very quiet and very warm. And I sat there watching her lashes and her throat move and feeling my heartbeat relocate to everywhere she was touching, and the fully involuntary thought crossed my mind that no date I had ever been on had gone this well. Then the color came into her, visibly. A tide line of almost pink rising up her throat, into her cheeks. She stopped exactly when she'd planned to stop, which I could tell cost her something, licked the cut once, slow, and it sealed. Just closed, like her mouth was a notary. New trick. Her saliva had opinions about my skin staying shut, and that discovery had implications my brain kept in a special drawer marked "Do Not Open During Daylight." That was the moment Marcus opened the door with a granola bar in his mouth, stood there for 3 full seconds absorbing the lamp, the knees, the wrist at her lips, my face, which I'm sure had a completely normal expression on it, and said, around the granola, "My bad," and closed the door. Then, through the door, we heard him tell the entire hallway, "They're doing a blood thing, it's romantic, do not go in there." The stage 2, and I've decided to call them stages because she refused to name them anything, arrived 20 minutes later, mid-walk on the quad. She stopped. Tilted her head. And a zombie a full block away, out past the library, one of Trent's escaped complaints shuffling for the fence line, turned around and came back. She hadn't moved her mouth. Her reach had gone from her voice to something underneath her voice, a channel in the low sound the horde passed around, and she could ride it a block in every direction. And the first thing she did with a power like that, an actual command frequency over the army of the dead, was find me at the other end of the quad, where I was talking to Dana about iron supplements, and make the 200 corpses between us all turn and look at Dana at the same time. Message received, everybody. Message received. Because we should talk about the diet, and Dana, and what my life had become as livestock with benefits. 2 feedings a week, plus the marking budget, meant my body was running a small export business, and Dana had appointed herself its regulator. She prescribed like a woman avenging a grudge against my hemoglobin, spinach, lentils, red meat when we could get it, a horrifying nightly supplement stack, and mandatory naps that Marcus enforced by picking me up. She also skimmed every checkup, a little extra off the top into a glass tube, for research, she said, and by the end of the week there were 6 of them racked in the infirmary fridge like a savings account. Vivienne watched that rack the way normal people watch a stranger hold their baby, and said nothing, because it was Dana, and because our whole fragile constitution ran on certain things not being said out loud. And Vivienne took the textbook chapter on donor recovery personally. The queen of the campus dead started sending raiding parties, her fastest runners, the track team, out into the city, and they came back through the fence at dawn carrying, I swear this on my life, cast iron pans, multivitamins, and spinach. Armloads of spinach. A dead sprinter in a varsity jacket jogging out of the smoke of a fallen civilization with a reusable grocery bag of leafy greens, twice a week, forever. The end of the world has a look, and it's that. She'd watch me eat, too. Sat across the table, chin on her folded hands, tracking every fork of lentils with the satisfaction of a fund manager watching a deposit clear. You're not eating, I said once, you want some? And she said, without a flicker, I only like one restaurant now. And I choked on the lentils, and she reached over and thumped my back exactly once, calibrated, and added, chew. You're my whole pantry. Act like it. Day 4, we went to the city, and the reason we went was a kid named P.D. Alvarez on the 3rd floor, who had been quietly cutting his insulin doses in half since the outbreak and got caught only because Dana counts everything. Type 1, 15 years old, evacuated into our dorm from the visiting robotics fair of all the cosmic jokes, and his supply had 9 days left at half rations, and half rations, Dana explained to the common room in her flattest voice, is not a diet, it's a slower ambulance. The medical plaza was 6 blocks past the campus gate. Nobody's rules out there. So the queen decided the queen was going shopping. The expedition was her, me, Marcus, Dana, and 2 of the track team as outriders, and the argument about whether I personally was coming lasted 3 rounds. Her opening position was that I would stay inside the fence, possibly inside a safe, possibly inside a second, smaller safe. Dana's rebuttal was that the entire pharmacy list was written in medical, and her hands would be full of it, and somebody with donor center miles had to know a butterfly needle from a bee sting. My closing statement was that the marking wears off in a day and she'd have to come back and do it in the middle of a supply run, in hostile territory, which wasn't an argument so much as a scheduling observation, and I watched her lose the debate to her own ritual. She hated it. She fixed my collar about it. We left at first light. 6 blocks is nothing. 6 blocks is a coffee errand. 6 blocks off campus in the New World was a museum of the worst day in history, and we walked it single file and quiet. Cars with their doors open and their radios dead. A dog leash tied to a bike rack with no dog on it, which is somehow the saddest object I have ever seen. Ferals, the city kind, the unenrolled, standing in the strangest places, an intersection, a bus shelter, a kiddie pool, dormant, running some last errand in the basement of themselves. They didn't organize like ours. They didn't bow. When one of them clocked us outside the plaza and it came on like static, no rank, no rules, and Vivienne put it down with a lamppost economy that didn't even interrupt her stride, and I watched her watch the street after, uneasy, and understood. Out here she wasn't a government. She was just the strongest animal on the block, and she knew better than anyone what the difference was worth. The plaza pharmacy had been looted stupid, which is the only mercy of amateur looters. They take the opioids and leave the insulin, because nobody robs a pharmacy planning to survive long enough to need a pancreas. Dana went down her list like a woman possessed by a filing cabinet. Marcus filled a shopping cart with the entire diabetic supply shelf plus, for reasons he defended to his last breath, an entire display case of novelty sunglasses. And I found, on the floor behind the register, a case of those juice boxes they give you after donation, and held one up, and across the ruined store the queen of the dead looked at it, then at me, and said, with total sincerity, put those in the cart, all of them, and I lived the singular experience of being packed for. It went wrong on the way out, and it went wrong in a way none of us had planned for, because it wasn't Ferals. It was an engine, a school bus, of all the vehicles on Earth, grinding up the boulevard with plywood on the windows and a snowplow bolted to the nose, and it slowed when it saw us. The man leaning out the folding door wore a varsity jacket that didn't fit him, and the smell reached us before his voice did. Cologne. Overwrought. Easy, easy, he called, hands up, smiling with a mouth that had too much moisture in it. East Campus Procurement. You're the West crowd, right, the sanctuary people. He said sanctuary the way you'd say petting zoo. We're not shopping for trouble. Just passengers. And then I heard the bus, not the engine. The inside of it. Knuckles, soft, on plywood, and a voice, human, female, saying, muffled, please, we're from the plaza offices, there are 6 of us, they said there's food at the stadium, Please, is anyone out there? The plywood knocked again, polite, exhausted, like someone who had been knocking for hours and had stopped expecting anything from it. Passengers, Vivienne said. Volunteers, the recruiter said, moist and smooth. Everybody at the stadium's a volunteer. The president's very firm on that. Room and board, protection, 3 squares. He looked at me then, and his nose did something involuntary and awful, flaring, and his whole face went reverent, and he leaned further out the door and breathed, "Oh, you're the warm one the channel hums about. The president keeps asking what it is the queen keeps. There's a standing price on you, did you know that? You're the only item on," and that's the exact point at which Vivienne took the snowplow off the front of the bus. Off. With her hands. The bolts sheared like piano notes, and she set the plow down on the asphalt with a clang that relocated every pigeon in the county, and stood between the bus and me holding a length of its bumper like a baguette, and said, to the recruiter, in the voice she used for couch disputes, "New route. Passengers get out here. You get to keep the bus, the jacket, and whatever's pooling in your mouth. Renegotiate and you get to keep the bus." They got out blinking into the light, 6 of them, plaza office people, a man with a lanyard he hadn't taken off in 3 weeks, a pair of interns holding hands, and a woman, 50s, gray coming into a long dark braid, who stepped down last, looked at the dead girl holding a bumper, looked at the rest of us, and did triage on the situation faster than anyone I'd met. "You're the campus," she said. "The one with the fence and the rules." And Vivienne said, "We are," and the woman with the braid nodded, slow, and then said the thing I didn't understand for weeks, and should have. "Then you can feed 6 more, because I'm sending you 6. I'm getting back on the bus." Even the recruiter looked confused. She climbed back up the steps, settled herself, and looked at us through the folding door with the calm of a woman who has finished doing her math. "My husband's been at that stadium since day 2, she said. "He's alive, they keep the useful ones alive, he was a nurse. Whoever's running the place needs hands that remember needles. So do I." She pulled her braid over one shoulder, and to me, specifically to me, because even then, even there, everything with a nose knew what I was, she added, "If you ever come to the stadium, boy, and you will, the way this is all pointed, look for the braid." And the bus ground away east with the one volunteer it had ever legally carried, and we stood in the boulevard with 6 freed strangers and a snowplow. Vivienne watched the bus go with an expression I'd never seen on her, which was a person seeing a version of themselves in a windshield's reflection and filing it away. 2 more things happened on the walk home, and they're both load-bearing. The first was the swarm. Freeing prisoners takes time and noise, and the city ferals had finished their errands, and 8 blocks of static converged on the boulevard at once, more than lamppost math could solve. And Vivienne stopped in the middle of the street, told everyone, "Hold hands," which is a sentence that saves lives and dignity never recovers from, and did something I hadn't yet known she could do. She shouted. The low channel, full power, in open country. 2 blocks of ferals sat down in the intersection like a preschool. We walked out between them, a chain of paper dolls led by a queen, and by the time we reached the campus gate she was gray around the mouth, and her stride had a mathematical carefulness to it. The shout, I understood, was not free, it was a withdrawal, and out there with no fence and no throne, she'd spent the account down to fumes protecting a boy, a bag of insulin, and 6 strangers. Which led to the second thing. At the gate, in full view of the watch, the fence teams, the freed office workers, and God, her legs did a thing that legs should not do, and I got a shoulder under her arm. And she looked at me with the affront of an empress being offered a coupon, and I said, quietly, "Your 2 withdrawals passed safe this week, and I'm offering," and Dana, without breaking stride, said, 3 seconds, and started the count. And that's how the entire West Campus learned the actual mechanics of its government. At the gate, at sunset, the Queen of the Dead drinking from her boy's wrist in front of everybody, too spent to make it private. My free hand holding her hair back, her hand fisted in my jacket like the jacket had opinions, Marcus solemnly distributing novelty sunglasses to the freed as a welcome gift. Petey Alvarez on the steps with his new insulin, watching the 2 of us with his whole face, and saying, to Dana, in the tone of a kid doing the only math that matters, so the rule is somebody bleeds so somebody eats. And Dana said, that's the whole campus, kid. Welcome home. Day 6 was the cafeteria run, and day 6 is where the comedy stops for a minute, so enjoy the spinach while it lasts. The dining commons had a walk-in freezer full of protein that Trent's clipboard wanted badly, and the building had been swept twice by the track team, clean both times, so it was me, Marcus, Dana, 2 volunteers, and a girl named June Park, a freshman from the 3rd floor, quiet, big glasses, the kind of kid who apologizes to furniture, who'd volunteered because the seniors made it look safe. Vivienne stayed at the fence because a summit was happening. 3 of her enrolled had gone missing overnight, and a fourth had come back changed, babbling in the low channel about the stadium, about meat, about a president who pays. Rex was recruiting out of her lawn. And the night before, we'd caught one of the salesmen, which is a story the campus still tells, so I'll tell it right. The a cappella section had gone off at 2 in the morning, B-flat, short bursts, the code for something warm moving wrong. And the fence teams had converged on the loading dock and found our moist friend from the school bus, same borrowed varsity jacket, crouched by our fence line with a duffel bag of raw meat and a bicycle horn. That was the recruiting kit. Honk the horn, toss the meat, lead the responding zombie away like a stray. 3 of ours gone in 2 nights to a man with a horn. Vivienne convened court on the quad at sunrise, and I used the word court with precision, because she did. She sat on the admin steps. The enrolled assembled in their rows. Humans watched from the windows, and the recruiter stood at the center of the lawn in the grip of 2 dead linebackers, smirking, wet-mouthed, absolutely certain of the shape of his morning. Because his employer's theory of the world was that everything strong eats and everything smart negotiates, so a strong smart queen would obviously either eat him or deal. She did neither, and the way she did neither taught the whole campus what it lived under. First she had him empty the duffel and feed the meat, piece by piece, to the enrolled he'd been poaching, by hand, which took 11 minutes and cost him his smirk by the 3rd piece. Because the enrolled took each piece politely, from his shaking fingers, on their queen's standing order, and there is apparently nothing on this earth that dismantles a man like the monster he came to steal saying thank you. Then she took his horn, considered it, and honked it once, experimentally, which got a laugh from the windows she absolutely intended to get. And then she crouched in front of him, campus queen at a garage sale, and said, "Here's my counteroffer, salesman. You walk back east, intact, carrying a message. The message is a question. Ask your president what he pays the ones who stop being useful. Ask him out loud, at dinner, in front of the others. That's the whole message." And she stood, and added, to the linebackers, "Walk him to the line, gently, he's a courier now, and couriers arrive." He left pale, and I found out at homecoming what became of him, which is that he asked. You could tell, because at homecoming he was serving the punch, in an apron, eyes down, wet mouth shut, and his varsity jacket was on somebody else. She didn't kill Rex's salesman. She mailed him back as a mirror, and Rex, being Rex, made the mirror staff. That's where her head was when we walked into the commons, and that's my excuse for what we missed, which is that the freezer wasn't empty, it was insulated. Old meat doesn't smell, and the doors were shut, and the sweep had walked right past a pocket of feral dead, the unenrolled kind. The kind from off campus with nobody's rules on them, that had packed into the freezer after the temperature died and gone dormant in the dark like wasps in a wall. Marcus opened the door because his arms are our forklift. The first one came out of the rack so fast it took his feet out, and then the room was a blender. Shelving down, trays everywhere, one volunteer straight out the window, gone, smart men, and I did what I do in a crisis, which is grab the nearest wheeled object, a lunch cart, and put it between the teeth and the freshman. It worked for exactly 1 hit. The second hit put the cart into my chest and me into the milk cooler, and a dead line cook in a hairnet came over the top of it with his mouth open, and I got a hand under his chin, which is a delay, not a plan. 2 things happened in the next 4 seconds. The first was June screaming, short and sharp, and going down behind the tray rails with a ferrule on her arm. The second was the doors. Both sets, front and side, coming off their frames at the same time. She'd heard it, you understand. From the fence, mid-summit, 3 buildings, and a parking lot away, she'd heard my heartbeat change gear, and what came through those doors was not the girl who ruled on couch disputes. The lights weren't great, and I was busy, and I'll just tell you the part I'm sure of. The line cook's weight left me all at once, going up. Not sideways. Up. It was over before my lungs finished one breath. Fastest thing I've ever seen, and I include everything after this in that measurement. Barrels dropped where they stood, and then she had me by the front of the shirt with both hands, hauled me out of the cooler, and stood there in the wreckage doing something I'd never seen her do. Shaking. Her hands, on my shirt, were shaking. "You're bleeding," she said, and her voice came out with gravel under it, 2 tones at once, and her eyes had gone all shine. The cart had opened my forearm on its way through me. Nothing dramatic, but it was open, and it was close to her face, and every part of her had just spent 40 seconds in kill gear, and I watched her look at my arm and swallow, and I did the arithmetic on the distance between her teeth and me, which was 0. Here's what I did, and Dana later called it either the smartest or stupidest triage decision she'd ever witnessed. I lifted the arm and held it out to her. "Go ahead," I said. "Before it stops being useful." She took my wrist in both hands, careful like the freezer hadn't happened, and she drank for 3 seconds, exactly 3, I counted, and sealed the cut with her tongue, and stepped back from me a full pace, and put her back against the wrecked shelving, and breathed until the second tone left her voice. Then she said, quietly, to the floor, the truest thing anyone said all apocalypse. Do you know what you smell like to me, Ethan? Every day. All day. You smell like the last hot meal in a starving city, and I have a reserved table, and I am always, always hungry. Loving you, she said, is a diet. And I, because my mouth has no supervision, said, well, you did put me in your planner. She laughed. First time since the cold room. It came out rusty, 2 notes, entirely hers, and it did more damage to me than the lunch card had. Which brings me to June, because June got bitten in that freezer, and the apocalypse doesn't stop moving so 2 people can have a moment by the milk cooler. Dana had her laid out behind the rails with a belt above the bite, which does nothing. Everyone knew it did nothing, and June knew it best of all. She was gray by the time we got the shelving off, that phone screen gray I'd seen in a refrigerator 6 days before, and her veins were going dark, and she looked up at us through those big glasses, and she apologized for the inconvenience. She was dying of the end of the world, and she apologized for the scheduling impact. And everyone was looking at me. Vivienne. Dana. Marcus, holding June's other hand. Everyone who knew. Vivienne's face had gone to stone, because she saw all of it at once. Of course she did, she'd been valedictorian of seeing consequences. But she didn't say no. She looked at June the way she'd looked at 40 scared faces from the dorm lawn, hers now, one of hers going out, and she stepped back and let me kneel down, and the only thing she said was to Dana, and it was, small dose. He needs what he has. So June Park became the second person in the world to drink from me, 3 tablespoons off a boiled soup spoon, which is the least romantic sentence in this story, and I'm keeping it that way on purpose, because what happened after was not romantic either. It worked. That's the miracle part. The black stopped climbing at her elbow and turned around, and her mind stayed hers, all of her stayed hers, June-shaped, apologetic, alive in every way that argues. But she woke up different in one specific direction, and I watched it arrive. Her eyes opened, found the ceiling, found Dana, polite, found Marcus, grateful, and then found me. And locked. Pupils blown wide, whole face flooding with something enormous and simple, and the first words out of the second saved soul in human history were, oh no, you. The imprint, Dana called it later, writing in her notebook by candlelight like a woman documenting her own crime scene. The virus rewires hunger, that's all it is. It takes the strongest circuit in the body and reroutes it, and when the blood that saves you belongs to a person, the hunger comes back aimed. Vivienne had drunk pints of me at death's door. June had 3 tablespoons off a spoon. Same arrow, smaller bow. June did not become dangerous. I want to be fair to June. She became present. I'd leave my room, June. Breakfast line, June, 4 back, waving. Watch duty, June had signed up too. Isn't that funny, small world? She followed me the way a duckling follows a boot, radiating apology the whole time, fully aware, telling Dana in her exit interviews, I know how it looks, I just feel better when I can hear him, is that weird? And Dana saying, yes, and June nodding miserably and not stopping. Want to know what jealousy looks like on a zombie boss? I'll tell you what it looks like. It's quiet. Vivienne never raised her voice at that girl once. She just started existing at angles. Wherever June oriented, there was Vivienne, in the sight line, in the doorway, on the stairs, materialized, arms folded, smiling the way frost forms. The morning announcements got 4 minutes longer and moved to the lobby. My collar has never been so publicly straightened. And one evening she sat June down across a table, queen and duckling, and I got waved off from earshot, so all I can report is the visual, June nodding fast for 10 minutes, Vivienne speaking slow, and both of them shaking hands at the end like the closing of a hostile merger. Arm's length, was all Vivienne told me after. She stays, she's mine now too, she keeps her distance, and if she ever gets confused about which of us saved her, she can take it up with management. Then she paused, gave me a sideways look, and said, you have a type of problem I don't have a word for yet. You're delicious to the wrong species. And every person we save is going to love you a little. I'm going to have to build a whole government around how good you taste. I laughed. She did not laugh. She was drafting the government. Trent found me on the back stairs that night. No clipboard, which for Trent was a state of undress. He stood 2 steps below me, which he'd never once done. Trent was a higher stepman by nature, and he asked, quietly, with no protocol anywhere in it, if I get bitten, am I on the list? And I hesitated. 1 second, maybe 2, because the honest answer was that I don't decide the list, and in that second something behind his face closed like a shop grate. He nodded, thanked me, actually thanked me, and went up past my shoulder, and I stood there feeling like I'd failed a test nobody had shown me the question for. You can draw a straight line from that stairwell to everything he did after. I've drawn it 100 times since. It doesn't get less straight. Because here's what the June incident actually did, and Trent's clipboard got there before I did. It leaked. Not the details, the shape. 40 people in one building, and by the weekend all of them had done the math. The Queen's boy got scratched and didn't turn, the bitten girl drank something and lived. People started looking at me on the stairs, and their eyes would drop, just for a half second, to the inside of my elbow. A guy from the 4th floor offered to trade me his watch for, quote, a shot glass of the good stuff, in case. A mother, one of the staff who'd sheltered with us, just stood in front of me one morning holding her kid's hand and looking at me, not asking, which was worse than asking. Vivienne ended it in the dining room on day 8, at dinner, in front of everyone. No speech from the steps this time. She stood behind my chair with her hands on my shoulders, cold coming off her like an open freezer aisle, and addressed the room in the tone she used on the enrolled. This building is protected because he's in it, she said. What's in him goes where I say, when I say, to who I say, and it goes by gift. It is never taken. Anyone who tries to take it, and she smiled here, and the whole room's blood pressure dropped, will find out that I'm not the biggest thing on this campus because of my personality. And she leaned down to my ear, in front of all of them, deliberate as a signature, and said, eat your lentils, sweetheart. And sat down. And that was the law now. I was the law's lentil-eating boyfriend, apparently, an announcement she'd made to the entire surviving population without at any point running it past me. And I sat there under 40 pairs of eyes with my government-issued girlfriend watching me chew, thinking, not for the last time, that there was no longer any version of my life that didn't run through her. Which is exactly what Trent Wexler wrote on his clipboard. I know because we found the clipboard. Day 9, the night before homecoming. The a cappella section on the science roof opened up in B-flat at 3 in the morning, and the fence teams hit their lights, and we counted heads, and we were one asset and one liability short. Trent was gone. Over the back fence, past the loading dock, a hole cut clean, his vest found folded on the ground like a resignation letter. The infirmary fridge, Dana's little kingdom of labeled bins, stood open with its lock popped, and the rack where she kept her research vials, 6 glass tubes of exactly what you think they were, was empty. Dana stood in front of that fridge doing arithmetic with her jaw set, and Vivienne stood very still beside her, head tilted, listening to something a block out, then 2 blocks, then gone, and Marcus, whose job this was, asked it out loud. The stadium guy pays for meat, right, he said. So what does he pay for that? Vivienne turned around, and her eyes had the shine all through them, and the frost came off her in one visible breath, the way it did when the last version of a plan died. We're going to homecoming, she said. All of us. And I need my dress a day early. The dress deserves its own minute, because the way she got it tells you everything about what my blood had been building all week. She didn't send the track team to loot a store. She described, from memory, a specific gown in a specific boutique window 11 blocks off campus, dove gray, off the shoulder, the one, in her own words, she'd promised herself for graduation. And 2 dead sprinters brought it back through an active apocalypse in a garment bag, unwrinkled, before sunrise. One of them had also, for reasons that died with him, brought a lint roller. Getting me dressed was a committee project. The problem was stated by Dana in her flattest clinical voice, we are taking the world's most bite-valuable human into a stadium full of teeth. And the solution was Marcus, who spent 2 hours duct-taping magazines around my forearms under a borrowed suit jacket until I crinkled when I waved. Dana packed a field kit and drilled me on the rules like a boxing coach. If you bleed, pressure and shout. If she has to feed mid-fight, 3 seconds, you count them out loud, and if you feel cold in your lips you sit down wherever you are. I don't care if it's on a corpse. June contributed by standing in my doorway radiating doom and saying, quietly, don't go, it smells wrong east of the library, everything that walks past the fence from the east has his smell in its clothes. Which would have been more helpful before the Queen had accepted the invitation, but got her a promotion anyway. We spent the night on watch with the a cappella section, our anxious little early warning duckling. And then there was Vivienne, in dove gray, with frost for jewelry. She grew it on purpose, a lattice of ice across her collarbones that caught the light like a necklace, and when I failed to stop looking at it, she looked pleased in that quiet cat way and said, it's rude to arrive at a coronation without something on your neck. Then she looked at mine, bare over the taped magazine armor, and thought about it visibly, the way she thought about supply lines. And did the morning ritual a second time, slower, right in front of everyone assembled in the lobby, on the theory that we were about to walk into a building full of noses and her signature needed to be, her words, legible from the cheap seats. Before we left, she briefed me. Sat me down in the common room with the whole away team and delivered, off index cards, a lecture titled, and she'd actually titled it, Protocol for the Warm at Functions of the Dead. Rule 1. Compliment nobody. A compliment among their kind is an appraisal, and an appraisal is the first step in a transfer of ownership, and if you tell some curated colonel his jacket is nice, there are 3 ways the evening goes and 2 of them end with you in the jacket. Rule 2. Accept nothing. Not a chair, not a drink, not a dance, nothing that can later be described as hospitality, because hospitality, in the president's economy, is debt, and debt, she said, looking at me with meaning, gets collected. Rule 3. If we're separated, you stop. You do not run, you do not hide, you stand completely still and be furniture, because everything in that building hunts motion and respects property. And you, she said, with the grim satisfaction of a woman quoting her own morning's work, will smell like the most clearly labeled property in the Western Hemisphere. Marcus raised his hand and asked what the protocol was if somebody complimented him. Vivienne considered him seriously and said, thank them once and change the subject, nobody wants to inherit you, you're a maintenance nightmare, and Marcus glowed about this for the rest of the day. We left at dusk. You have never seen anything like her horde in parade order. The track team ran the flanks in formation. The mascot led. 200 enrolled dead walking in rows behind their queen through a ruined campus, and on the rooftops along the route, the a cappella section held one lone note from building to building, passing us hand to hand through the dark like a torch made of sound. Marcus walked next to me with his bat and his church face. He whispered, dude, we're the royal procession, and I whispered back, we're the lunch delivery, and Vivienne, 10 feet ahead, without turning her head, said, you're both right. Could smell the stadium before you saw it. Cologne, again, oceans of it, sprayed over the top of something older and browner that no bottle was ever going to beat. The lights were on. He had generators, and he'd spent them on the big stadium floods, and on string lights, actual string lights, zigzagged over the field like a wedding. The field was set for a gala. Long tables, white cloths gone gray, a punch bowl I refused to examine, and dead couples slow dancing at the 50-yard line to a marching band that stood in perfect formation playing the school fight song over and over and over, each loop a little wetter than the last. Round the top ring of the stadium stood his people. Hundreds. Different from ours. Ours kept habits. His kept rank. Every one of them stood at attention, faced in, hungry, and did absolutely nothing without permission. It wasn't a horde. It was a garrison. And down the 50, under a homecoming arch built from goalposts and crepe paper, flanked by what remained of Fraternity Row, came Rex Calloway. I'll do my best. He was in his Letterman jacket over a tuxedo shirt, homecoming king sash across his chest, and he had been repaired. That's the only word. Whatever the bite and the first weeks had taken off him, he'd replaced from donors, and he'd had his pick of the best, so the overall effect was of a catalog model assembled by a committee with excellent taste and no access to the original photo. Handsome. Genuinely, upsettingly handsome, 6'4" of curated parts, moving with the antique smoothness of a man who had practiced walking after death and gotten good at it. Only the seams gave him away, hairline scars at the throat and wrists where the tailoring showed, and the smell under the cologne, and the eyes, which had the shine all the way through, no brown left at all. Vivienne, he said, and his voice was the worst part, because it was still a politician's voice, warm, amplified from the chest, with just a click behind the consonants like a wet turn signal. You came. You look like the end of the world. Rex, she said. You look like a group project. So the Queen of the Dead got the first laugh of homecoming, at her ex's expense, and the marching band lost the beat for half a bar because some of them had been in the audience for their arguments when everyone was alive. He gave the crowd a chuckle, gracious, absorbing it the way politicians do. Then his eyes came to me, and stayed, and everything friendly drained out of the shine. Beside them, at his elbow, holding a fresh clipboard with the stadium's crest already drawn on it in marker, stood Trent Wexler in a brand-new reflective vest. He did not look at me. Men who sell you always find something fascinating in the middle distance. You brought it, Rex said. The juice box. He has a name, said Marcus, wonderful, loyal, suicidal Marcus, and the entire garrison ring leaned in 1 inch, and Vivienne raised 2 fingers without looking and the temperature dropped and everyone remembered we were at a party. What followed was dinner diplomacy, and I'll compress the boring parts. He offered a merger. Campus split down the quad line was beneath them both, he said. 1 campus, 1 crown, the 2 of them the way it was always meant to be. His people would even stop taking hers, which was his way of admitting he'd been taking hers. He talked about the future like a man reading a brochure for it, farms of the warm, orderly feeding schedules, a sustainable relationship between the living and the dead, and the living he gestured at, when he said it, were the dance floor. He'd kept some. Around the tables, pale and moving carefully, human staff in catering aprons refilled cups for dead guests, and not one of them raised their eyes above anyone's collar. And I thought about the freshman dorm applauding under our balcony and understood, in one cold drop, what the other version of being saved looked like. One of them refilled mine. Water, from a pitcher, hands steady, eyes down like all the rest, and it wasn't until the gray braid swung past my shoulder that my stomach dropped through the field. 6 days since the boulevard. She didn't look at me. She poured like pouring was a language, and under the band, under Rex's brochure voice, so quietly I might have invented it, she said, "Found the braid faster than I figured, boy. The tall one bussing the far table is my Sam." Both still breathing. "Don't do anything brave at dinner." And she moved on down the table with her pitcher, spine straight in a room full of things that could fold her in half, and I looked at the far table. The tallman clearing plates there moved exactly the way she poured, precise, economical, hands that remembered needles, and I sat in the middle of the enemy's gala doing arithmetic about what it costs to volunteer for a place like this, and coming up short. Then came the beat that comes back later. Midway through his pitch, Rex reached over, without asking, and adjusted the fall of Vivienne's hair, one lock, off her shoulder, proprietary as a man straightening a picture frame in his own house. And he said, "You were always mine, Viv. Before all this. Everyone knew. I just had to wait for the version of the world where you'd admit it." She went very still, and I watched her hear it. The grammar. The ownership case. The exact tense I'd been living in for 10 days, out of a mouth with seams at the corners, and something crossed her face too fast to name, and her eyes flicked, just once, to me. I'd like to tell you I kept a diplomatic face. I have no idea what my face did. I was busy having the thought that would spend the rest of this story growing. That's her accent. He speaks her language with a worse accent, and she just heard it out loud for the first time. She took his hand off her hair at the wrist, 2 fingers, the way you'd remove a caterpillar from a lapel, and set it back on the table. "Not a version of the world, Rex," she said. "I'm the weather in this one. Sit down." He sat. The garrison ring made its low sound. And then he smiled, forgave her in front of everyone, which is a power move if you can land it, and said, "You were also always sentimental about strays. So let's talk about yours," and he snapped his fingers, and Trent stepped forward and set a small steel rack on the white tablecloth, a 6-slot rack, and in it, catching the string lights, stood glass vials of my blood. 4 of them, actually. 2 slots were empty. Dana made a sound through her nose. Vivienne did not move at all, which is how I knew we were in the bad part of the evening. Rex lifted one vial, held it to the light like a sommelier, and addressed the tables in his gala voice. "You'll forgive the theater," he said. My consultant came to me with a story I didn't believe. That my opposite numbers rise wasn't talent. That the queen of the West Campus runs on a donor. That everything she is, the speed, the reach, the pretty frost, pours out of one bag of a boy she keeps beside her, and refills twice a week by appointment. He turned the vial slowly. "So I tested the story last night. 1 dose, one of my lieutenants, the fastest of the row." He gestured, and they brought the lieutenant out, and the field went quiet in a new way. It had been a frat president. Big guy, leather jacket, one of the curated dead, and he was faster now. You could see it in the idle, that awful coiled stillness her body had. That wasn't what silenced the field. The lieutenant walked to the head table, eyes fixed, jaw working, and it wasn't looking at Rex, or at Vivienne, or at the vial. It was looking at me. And straining. Against nothing visible, leaning into the air like a dog at the end of a chain, and making, low, constant, under the fight song, a sound I knew. I'd heard June make a politer version of it through my door at night. The pull. 3 tablespoons had made June a duckling. A full vial, in a body with no person left in it to be embarrassed, had made this. "It loves him," Rex said, with disgust, with fascination, wiping his hand on the tablecloth. "Whatever's in the boy, it doesn't just improve you. It aims you at him. My lieutenant has one idea left in its head, and the idea is Ethan." He said my name like a diagnosis. Then he set the vial back in the rack, laced his fingers, and made his real offer, the one the string lights had been rented for. "Keep your campus, Viv. Keep the dorm, the quad, the fence, the whole misty-eyed sanctuary project. I'll even return my consultant, he's already boring me." He looked at me, and the click behind his voice sped up, greedy, metronomic. "I just want the tap. Deliveries. Twice a week, by appointment, same as you. You keep the boy, I get the bottle, and nobody at this table has to find out what happens when two towers lean on each other. And Vivienne said no in the specific way I want played at my funeral. She stood, in no hurry, dove gray and frost under the stadium lights, picked up the steel rack with 4 vials of me in it, and held it out to the side, over the grass, at arm's length, and let the frost do the talking. It climbed out of her hand and over the rack, glass first, then the red inside, all 4 vials freezing solid with a sound like knuckles cracking. And then she closed her hand slightly and the whole thing, rack, glass, my irreplaceable priceless blood, crushed into red and silver gravel and sifted down onto the 50-yard line. "He is not a bottle," she said, to the whole stadium, in her step's voice, the one that carried. "He is not a tap, or a bag, or a vein with a boy attached. He is the only thing on this campus that is not for sale, trade, lease, or appointment. And if any of you are having trouble with the concept, watch closely, because I am about to demonstrate what he actually is." And then, ladies and gentlemen, in front of her ex, his garrison, his court, his consultant, and a marching band, Vivienne Hale walked the length of the head table to me, took my face in both cold hands, and kissed me. Not the neck. Not the ritual. The real thing, first one, deliberate, unhurried, one hand sliding to the back of my neck, mine, the taste of winter and copper and 3 years of 2 syllables, in front of every predator in the Tri-County area. And my crinkling magazine arms went around her, because they had been waiting their whole deputized lives for exactly this assignment. I kissed her back the way you sign something you've read twice, one hand finding the frost lattice at her nape, which bit my fingers with cold, and I did not pull them away, and somewhere very far away the band lost the fight song completely. She broke it off exactly when she chose to, kept her forehead against mine for one breath, and said, quietly, "Just for me, for later, not for him. Remember that part." Then she turned around and said, brightly, to Rex, "No deal. Great party. The punch is people." I think, in a cleaner story, that's where we walk out. What actually happened is that Rex started laughing, low, clicking, genuinely delighted, and stood, and took off his Letterman jacket, and folded it over his chair like a man about to do yard work. "I hoped you'd say that," he said. "Because I ran the second test this afternoon." And he answered the question of the second empty slot in front of us in the worst way, which is to say he showed us his forearm, where a neat surgical line had already healed silver, where he'd had it put directly into the seam of himself, hours ago. And the shine in his eyes kicked over into something with a pilot light behind it, and every hair I owned stood up at once. He'd already taken the dose. He'd sat through dinner with it in him. The offer had been theater. The no had been the plan, and one more thing had been the plan, and I only assembled it afterward. All through dinner he'd kept his eyes anywhere but on me, and I'd filed it as contempt. It wasn't contempt. A man who studied everything had spent an entire evening not looking at the inside of my elbow the way a dieting man doesn't look at a menu. And now, Dose declared, his eyes finally came to me and went there first, one involuntary flick to the crook of my arm, and he tore them away with something under his face that hated us both for it. "Viv," he said, rolling his repaired shoulders, and his voice came out doubled now, the politician on top and something in the crawlspace underneath, "I'd like you to meet the first version of me that's faster than you. What I remember of the next 90 seconds arrives in flashes, and I've stopped apologizing for that. The string lights coming down in a whip of sparks. Marcus putting a folding table between me and the garrison like a man closing a door. Dana's field kit already open, because medics see it coming first. The lieutenant hitting the end of its invisible chain and the chain not holding, because the only order Rex gave was a snap of his fingers, and the one idea in its head was me. Vivienne and Rex, meeting at the 50. I'd seen her in kill gear in the freezer. This was different. This was even, and even was the most frightening word of the apocalypse. He swung first, a full arm with a folding chair still in the hand, and she wasn't where the chair arrived, she was under it, inside his reach, and her palm hit his sternum and he went backward through the homecoming arch and brought it down on top of himself in a storm of crepe paper. He came out of the wreckage already running. They met again at the 30, and this time he caught her wrist out of the air, mid-strike, which nothing on this campus had ever done, and I watched her recalculate in one white flash, half a heartbeat before he threw her through the drum line. She came up off the turf with a dented sousaphone rocking beside her, frost boiling down her arms, pulled the goalpost out of the ground on her way back to him, and swung the whole upright like a 9-iron. He blocked it. It bent around his forearm, and the clang went around the stadium twice, and somewhere in my chest the last comfortable belief of the apocalypse quietly died, the one where nothing in the world was in her weight class. Then the garrison ring poured down the stadium steps in ordered ranks, and our track team hit them from the flank in formation, and the field became two governments having their first war over, precisely and literally, the drinking rights to my arm. We ran for the tunnel, the old players' tunnel under the bleachers, Marcus carrying half the barricade with him, Dana counting our heads out loud. And we were 20 feet in when the lieutenant came off the field after me, wrong-angled, fast, filling the corridor behind us like bad news, and I learned what June's pull looks like at full volume with nobody home. It wasn't attacking. That's the horror I need you to sit with. Even at a dead sprint it wasn't attacking, it was reaching, hands open, face desperate, a thing starving for one specific person with no plan for the after, and it was going to tear through Marcus and Dana to get to its idea. Vivienne arrived like weather, through the tunnel wall. Cinder block, then queen. She hit the lieutenant so hard the fight song stopped somewhere above us, put it down in a way I'll skip, and then swayed, and caught herself on the tunnel wall, and I saw the cost sheet. Rex had marked her 4 lines through the dove gray, shoulder to ribs, welling dark, and her frost had gone patchy, flickering like a sign in a dying strip mall, and above us the drumbeat of the garrison coming down the steps went on and on and on. He's fed, she said, matter of fact, spitting something dark. A stolen week of you, sewn into one seam. I can hold him or I can carry all of you out, not both. And there were too many for the math even before, and she stopped, because I was already unbuttoning the stupid magazine armor off my left arm. Dana said, 3 seconds, and started the count position like a referee. Vivienne looked at my bare wrist in the tunnel dark, and her face did the thing from the freezer, want and horror in one frame. She said, "Your 2 feedings passed safe this week already," and I said what I'd been keeping in the drawer marked "Do Not Open," and it turned out to be the hinge of everything after. "You keep saying I'm not a bottle," I said. "Prove it." "A bottle gets poured. I get asked. And I'm offering. That's the whole difference, Viv. Take it from the only person here who's giving it." She took my arm in both hands. "And this once, no scalpel, no letter opener, no boiled silver," she bit, quick and precise as a nurse's needle, at the wrist, and drank. The tunnel went white at the edges of my vision and very warm at the center, her mouth at my pulse and her hand fisted in my collar, and Dana counted 1. And the drums came down the steps, and Dana counted 2. And Vivienne's frost roared back down her arms like a fuse burning in reverse, and Dana counted 3. And she sealed the bite with her tongue and came off my wrist with her eyes blazing white-brown and every line of her lit like a stadium. What happened next has a name now. Horde calls it what she did at homecoming, in their low channel, the way you'd say the flood, or the fire. She walked back out of that tunnel mouth, took the deepest breath a dead girl has ever taken, and shouted. Not words. Rank the low channel, at full power, at parade volume, an octave under hearing that hit the whole stadium like a change in air pressure, and every zombie in the building, hers, his, the band, the garrison, the dancers, every dead thing for 3 blocks in any direction, sat down, all at once. Hundreds of corpses, mid-fight, mid-march, mid-song, folding to the ground like the gravity had been turned up, and holding there, pinned under her voice. Everything except Rex. He stayed on his feet at the 50, alone, braced against it, seemed straining, the only other creature in the stadium strong enough to stand in her weather, and even he could not make his garrison get up. We walked out through a stadium of kneeling dead. She led. We followed. Nobody spoke. At the gate she stopped, turned, found Rex still standing in the ruins of his party at midfield, and gave him the prom queen smile across 300 bowed bodies. "Thanks for having us," she said. "Lovely venue." And Rex, still pinned at the edges, still smiling, because men like him die smiling, called back the only true thing he said all night. "You can't shout forever, Viv, and he can't bleed forever. One of those runs out first. I'll be there that day." I made it to the parking lot line under my own power, which I want on my tombstone. I remember the fence, remember June's voice from the roof, and the B-flat opening up above us, triumphant, and Marcus laughing, and I remember the world tilting on its side very gently, like it was being poured. And the last thing I logged before the dark came in was fingers, cold, familiar, finding my pulse, and a voice I'd have known anywhere counting, and losing count, and starting over, faster. I woke up in the infirmary with an 4 in my arm and sunlight through the blinds, and I knew 3 things before I opened my eyes. Blinds were new. The window behind them had plywood behind the glass, screwed from outside. And the door I could see through the blind's reflection had no handle on my side. Her voice came through the door, calm and even and rehearsed, the voice of a girl who had been sitting in that hallway composing a policy statement all night. "Your heart missed 4 beats in the parking lot," she said. "I counted them, Ethan. 4 gaps, each one longer than the last. Those are the numbers behind the new policy." I said, "Viv. Open the door." Drink your juice, said the queen of the campus, gently, through 2 inches of which she could have folded in half. There's a straw. We'll talk when your color's back. My imprisonment deserves an accurate description, because it was the nicest thing that has ever been done to me against my will. Infirmary had been converted overnight into what Dana, on her first supervised visit, called the presidential suite, and what Marcus, on his, called, with honest admiration, the world's softest jail. Real mattress, hauled from the faculty guest house. Books. A wind-up record player and 1 crate of somebody's jazz. Warm meals 3 times a day, and I mean composed meals, because the track team's rating list had gone gourmet: seared liver in a cast-iron pan, lentil stew with actual sausage in it, a multivitamin laid on the napkin like a mint at a hotel. The window was plywood. The door had no handle. And when they brought the food, it came through a slot that a dead carpenter had installed at the bottom of the door, professionally, with a little brush strip. If you're wondering what it does to a man's self-image to receive a beautifully plated iron-rich dinner through a pet flap, the answer is nothing good. She visited twice a day, and this is the part one have to be careful telling, because it would be easy to make it sound worse than it was, and a lie to make it sound better. She'd come in, sit in the chair by the bed, out of arm's reach, which was a choice, hers, not mine, and produce actual index cards. Talking points. The first card, every visit, was the numbers. Resting pulse this morning, 58. Color, better. Iron, up. She recited my vital signs to me like a mother reading a report card she was proud of, and then she'd move to card 2, which was always some version of the same argument. Out there, you're a resource, she said. Rex proved it in front of 300 witnesses. Every dead thing in this county now knows what runs in you, and half the warm ones too, and there is exactly one place on earth where nothing can reach you, and you're sitting in it, fed, rested, and alive, and I need you to explain to me slowly why that's cruelty. And the honest answer, which took me 3 days to build, is that a pantry with jazz in it is still a pantry. I tried the polite route first. Reasoned. Made my case through the door at night when her shape blocked the light at the bottom, because she slept there, if she slept at all, in the hallway, on a chair, guarding the one door in the world with nothing dangerous behind it. The polite route bounced off card 2 every time. Marcus ran contraband. Of course he did. Night 2, the pet flap opened outside meal hours and produced, in order, a candy bar, a comic book, a pack of playing cards, and Marcus's voice, at his version of a whisper, which rattled the 4-stand. Dude, quality of life package, he said. The candy's from my personal reserve, that's how serious this is, and don't tell Dana about the wrappers. I asked him through the flap whose side he was on, and there was a long guilty pause, and then he said, with the moral clarity that made him Marcus, I'm on the side where everybody's alive and nobody's in a room, man, but they only let me vote on half of that. He stationed himself against the outside of my door most evenings after that, ostensibly as extra guard, actually narrating the dorm's day to me through the wood, who'd fought over rations. What the Horde had learned, June's watch report drama, an entire evening news broadcast delivered by a man sitting on the floor of a hallway. When I finally told him, one night, that I was going to try the window, there was a pause, and the flap opened, and his enormous hand came through it holding a rolled pair of thick socks. For the drainpipe grip, he said. I officially advised against this. The socks are so you know how I really voted. So on night 3 I tried the classic. Bed sheets. The plywood had one loose corner, I'd worked it for 2 days, quiet as a monk, and I had 4 sheets braided into a rope you could tow a car with, and I got one leg out of that window. One whole leg into the free night air, 2 floors up. My best escape to date. And from the darkness below, conversational, unsurprised, her voice. 140, Ethan. I froze, straddling the sill. She was sitting on the bike rack in the dark, ankles crossed, looking up at me with her chin in her hand, and she'd been there, I later confirmed, every night, because of course she had. Your resting pulse is 58, she said. It's been 140 for an hour. It goes to 140 when you're planning something with your hands, and 155 when you're about to do the brave version. You've been snitching on yourself through my ears since the day we met, sweetheart. Go back to bed, and be careful on the sill, it's dusty. You cannot fight a warden who lives inside your heartbeat. I went back to bed. But something useful happened in that exchange anyway, because for 1 second, when my foot had come out over the drop, before she spoke, I'd heard something from the dark below. Small. Involuntary. The bike rack, creaking, as her hands closed on it. She wasn't calm down there. She was white-knuckled on a steel rail in the dark, every night, doing the math on a fall she couldn't reach in time. The index cards were a costume. That mattered. You'll see why it mattered. The person who actually broke the siege was Dana, because sieges are always broken by supply lines, and Dana was mine. Day 4, during the medical, blood pressure cuff on my arm, her back to the door camera, sorry, the door crack, where June's devoted shadow could be seen underneath, on guard, our duckling promoted to jailer. Dana spoke without moving her lips, like a ventriloquist, which I later learned she'd practiced. 2 things, she said. Thing 1. You're not the patient I'm worried about. I've been sampling her since the stadium, the wounds Rex gave her, she let me dress them, first time she's let anyone near her with gauze. Ethan, her cells are fighting the virus, slowly. Site by site. Your blood isn't just powering her, it's arguing with what she is, and it's winning by inches. There's a patch on her left wrist, size of a coin, that reads warm. Human warm. It's spreading a little every week, and it lunges after every feeding, and she wears my gauze over it so nobody sees, and she made me swear on my license not to tell you. I sat very still. The cuff hissed down. Thing 2, Dana said. I can concentrate it. What's in you, refined, the way they refine any medicine. Bio building has everything I need, and she'll authorize the trip because it's for you, she authorizes anything that's for you. Give me 10 days and I can put the whole argument in one syringe. A cure, Ethan. 1 dose, maybe 2 if I stretch. I can end what someone is. She paused, ripped the Velcro, and added the sentence that reorganized the entire war. So the question somebody in this building is eventually going to have to answer is, which someone? Because think it through, the way I had to, on a jailhouse mattress, with jazz on. A cure is a weapon, if what's coming for you is a monster. A cure is a tragedy, if the monster is what's keeping you alive. And a cure was, right now, today, already happening to Vivienne Hale, 1 coin-sized centimeter at a time, and she was hiding it like a diagnosis, and I only had to ask myself why for about 4 seconds, because the answer was on her index cards. Everything she was, the speed, the reach, the voice that made stadiums kneel, everything that stood between this dorm and the seams of Rex Calloway, was the thing my blood was slowly taking away from her. She wasn't hiding a cure. She was hiding a countdown. She came that evening with fresh cards, and I didn't let her get to card 1. Show me your wrist, I said. Everything in her stopped. The queen of 200 dead, who had walked through a wall to save me, sat in a chair by my bed with cards in her hand and could not move. Left 1, I said. Under the gauze that you let Dana put there, because some part of you wanted a witness even if you couldn't afford one. She took off the gauze. She did it slowly, and she watched my face the entire time, and there it was, on the inside of her left wrist, against all her winter, a coin of ordinary human color. Warm. Alive. Getting bigger every week she knew me. Say it, I said, gently, because gentleness was the only tool that had never once bounced off her. She looked at the little warm coin like it was a crack in a dam, and the index cards bent in her other hand, and Vivienne Hale, who had a talking point for the apocalypse itself, said the true thing in a voice I'd never heard her use, small, and fast, to get it over with. You're curing me, she said. Every time I drink, I get stronger for a week and warmer forever, and the map only ever moves in the one direction. I can't stop drinking. I don't mean the schedule, I mean I can't stop. Being near you is a diet and I'm failing it, and the frost is the only thing keeping everyone alive, and the warmth is the only thing and she stopped, and restarted, worse. And the warmth is mine, Ethan, it's the only thing that's mine and not the virus's, and it is eating my ability to protect you, and I have run this math every single night on a bike rack in the dark, and it doesn't resolve, so yes. I put you in a room because the room doesn't care if I'm strong. The room holds either way. I needed one thing in this equation that holds either way. And there it was. The whole war, in one wrist. Not a monster hoarding food. A girl watching the only 2 things she wanted, being human and keeping me breathing, eat each other alive on a schedule, and solving it the way she solved everything, with control, because control was the only language that had ever once kept her safe. Which is why what I said next was not a jailbreak argument. It was a counteroffer. Viv, I said. What's in me is a gift or it's nothing. That's not poetry, it's the mechanism, you've seen it work. It saved you when I chose it. It made June when I chose it. And the one time it went into someone through theft, through Trent's vials, it made that thing in the tunnel, a hunger with my name on it and nobody home. Given, it builds people. Taken, it builds monsters. So build the war plan on that. But a room I can't leave, she flinched, and I kept going, because this needed finishing. A room I can't leave turns every feeding from now until the end into taking. Slow taking, polite taking, with jazz, but taking, and you'll be drinking theft twice a week and wondering why the math gets worse. You know the difference, you're the only one who's tasted both. So here's my counteroffer. The door opens. I stay anyway. Her head came up. I stay, I said, because I choose the dorm, and the schedule, and the diet, and you. I've been choosing you since the refrigerator, you absolute menace. Locking the door was the only thing you ever did that made it hard. Give me back the handle, and I will hand you more than the room ever could. A donor who wants to be here beats a prisoner who doesn't, on power alone. Ask Dana, want is chemistry. When the warm patch reaches your shoulder, and your frost gets patchy, and Rex comes, we will handle it the way this whole thing started, which is with me holding out my arm and you deciding to stay you. There was a silence with a decision inside it. Then she stood, crossed to the door, hooked 2 fingers under the hinge plate, and peeled the 3 heavy screws her carpenter had sunk into the frame out of the wood one by one, like staples, obedient to her the way everything dead was. And the door swung open on a dark hallway where June pretended very badly to have been doing rounds. Terms, Vivienne said, turning around, and the index cards were gone. This was extempore, this was her actual voice. Feedings stay scheduled, Dana holds the calendar, not me, I don't trust me. You keep the guard detail outside the fence, non-negotiable, I've seen what wants you. You tell me before you do anything brave, 1 sentence of warning, that's all I ask, so my ears don't find out from your pulse. And the last term, she stopped, and the warm coin of her wrist caught the lamplight, and, if I get slower, when I get slower, you don't lie to me about it to be kind. I've been lied to by everyone who ever said they loved me, they lied about liking my ideas and fearing my father and wanting my time, courtesy lies, maintenance lies. You're the one who hands things over instead of taking them. So hand me the truth on schedule 2. Deal, I said. And then, because the door was open and the hallway was empty and the jazz had run out, I asked the question that had been sitting under everything since a refrigerator 2 weeks ago. One thing first. The coffee. Freshman year. You knew my name. She was quiet a second. Then she pulled the visitor chair over to the bed, sat down like a person and not a policy, and told me. Her brother, Danny, 16 back then, hit by a car crossing State Street in October of my freshman year, ruptured spleen, the whole bad lottery. And the hospital blood bank short exactly one thing that week, which is the thing that's always short, because only 2 people in 100 carry it and most of them never sit in the chair. Negative. There was a campus emergency appeal, she said. You wouldn't remember it, it was 1 poster among 900. And the bank came through, because some donor on this campus had a streak going, some anonymous idiot who'd been filling the shelf week after week for months before anyone needed it. And Danny got 3 units of somebody, and lived, and grew up, and got on the first convoy out of the city with our mother 2 weeks ago, and is, last I heard, alive. And I pulled a string with a girl who worked the donation center desk, which I should not have done, and she should not have let me, and I got a first name and a face. That's all. A first name and a face, attached to the shelf my brother drank from. And then, she said, I did nothing about it for 3 years, because what do? Walk up to a stranger and say, you're in my brother, thank you, that's insane, there's no greeting card. I used to rehearse versions of it. I'd see you in the dining hall with your discount noodles and your completion streak posture, and I'd rehearse, and it was always insane, so instead I learned your schedule, which, yes, I'm hearing it now, was also insane, just quieter. And one day I decided the normal human move was to start with an accident, knock something over, apologize, use your name, see if a conversation grew. So I bought an iced coffee I didn't want, and I stood near your table, and I knocked it onto your shoes, on purpose, with my whole heart pounding like a first date. And I said sorry, Ethan, and you looked at me like I'd handed you a car, and said, and I quote, no worries, and fled the building. I did flee the building, I said. I ran a personal best fleeing that building. I know, she said. I timed it. And then she looked down at her own wrists, the frost one and the warming one, and said the thing that reframed the entire apocalypse, quietly, like a lab result. So when you ask me why the virus aimed everything at you, Ethan, I don't think it invented anything. I think it found the oldest file in the building and turned the volume up. You were already the person whose blood meant my family gets to live. It just, and she opened her hands, made it literal. Everything about me got stronger when I died. That included this. I'm going to skip what happened for the next few minutes on the grounds that a gentleman doesn't, and a coward can't. I'll say this much. The door stayed open the whole time, her one concession to the new constitution, and June's footsteps in the hall did 3 very fast patrols past it. And somewhere in the middle of everything Vivienne pulled back an inch and said, against my mouth, with the first fully human laugh I'd ever heard out of her, Your pulse just told me you love me, you know. Can't take it back. It's in the record. And I said, 140, and she said, 155, and I said, that's the brave version, and kissed her again. The next day and a half, before everything, was the good part, and I'm going to spend it properly, because we earned it and because you should know what we were defending. The campus noticed the Constitution by breakfast. It's a small society, the dorm, news travels at the speed of Marcus, and when she did the morning ritual on the front steps, same as always, unhurried, proprietary, thorough, the difference was that afterward I reached up and straightened her collar. Just that. Turned the fold down flat, patted it once, the way she always did mine, and a freshman dropped a full tray, and June made a sound like a kettle taken off the burner in time. And Vivienne stood there in the morning light visibly rebooting, and then wore that fixed collar all day like a medal nobody else could see. That night she staged a date. Her word for it, announced at noon with agenda attached, because a queen doesn't ask, she schedules. Item 1, film. The lecture hall in the humanities building had a projector, the generator could spare an hour, courtesy of a track team run for fuel that she'd framed as strategic reserve testing. And somebody's lost and found DVD collection had yielded a romantic comedy from before either of us could drive, the kind where a big city woman inherits a small-town bakery. The dead ushered us in. That sentence deserves its own airtime. 2 gentled corpses in scavenged bow ties held the doors, because she'd assigned them, and the enrolled filed into the back rows by rank and sat, hands folded, facing front, an audience of the polite dead at a bakery movie. And every time the laugh track of the living, which was 6 humans and Marcus, went off, the back rows produced, 1 beat late, a low imitation groan of a laugh, learned, copied, aimed at fitting in, and I have never heard a sound more terrifying or more sincere. We negotiated the armrest like a border treaty. Her hand arrived on mine at the 11-minute mark, cold, certain, and she watched the whole film with her thumb on my pulse, which by then was less surveillance and more the way other couples share a milkshake. When the bakery woman chose the small town at the end, Vivienne said, quietly, to the screen, with real disdain, she should have kept both, and the back rows groaned their agreement 1 beat late, and that's the closest thing to a family movie night I've had in my adult life. Item 2 wasn't on the agenda. She stole it. We came out of the lecture hall into the first genuinely warm night of spring, and instead of walking me home she walked me up, roof of the humanities building, where she had, at some point between noon and dark, sent somebody with the wind-up record player from my old cell and the crate of records that came with it. She cranked it, set the needle down on something slow with brushes in it, and held out her hand, palm up, and said, I ran this campus for 3 years and never once got the dance at the end of the night. X always announced us and never once asked me. So. She flexed her fingers, once, impatient, queen to the last. I'm asking. I want to state for the medical community that I cannot dance. It didn't matter. You don't dance with Vivienne Hale so much as get orbited. Her hand found my waist and fixed my amateur frame like she fixed collars, and we turned slowly on a rooftop over a dead campus lit by trashcan fires and one impossibly untouched string of solar garden lights. And somewhere in the second song she stopped leading, which for her was a bigger confession than anything said out loud that week, and put her cheek against mine. And I felt it. The patch, warmth, 1 coin of it, against my cheekbone, on a girl made of winter, and my breath did something audible. And she said, without pulling back, you feel it, and I said, yes, and she was quiet through 4 bars of brushes and then said the thing she'd been carrying up all those stairs. It's halfway up my forearm now. Dana maps it every morning like a weather service. And someday, if your arm keeps winning the argument, the maps run out of blue, and what's left is just a girl. Warm hands. No channel, no frost, no shout. She turned her head a degree, so the words landed on my jaw. A girl could not have taken the snowplow off that bus, Ethan. A girl cannot stand between you and a stadium. Tell me honestly, because you're the one who hands things over instead of taking them. When the frost is gone, what exactly am I to you? And I said, the part that was never the frost, and I felt her go still, so I finished it at conversational volume, because shouting would have made it smaller. Viv, I fell for the girl who counted her own pulse down in a refrigerator so she'd die on schedule and inconvenience nobody. Everything after that, the speed, the shout, the weather, that's been very impressive. Set dressing on the person who said my name right twice in the dark. You're asking what you are when you can't protect me. You'll be what I've been the whole time. The reason. And it turns out being the reason is a full-time position. He didn't answer that with words, and the needle ran out into that soft repeating hiss at the end of a record, and neither of us went to fix it for a while. I'd love to end the interlude there. But this is a true account of loving something that diets on you, so the night gets one more scene. I woke at some black hour to a weight missing, the room's temperature wrong, and found her not beside me but across the room, in the corner, on the floor, knees up, back to the wall, as far from the bed as the walls allowed. Eyes open. Shining. Full. Skipped rations, she said, to the floor, conversational, terrible. Banking for the war. It seemed strategic at dinner. And then you fell asleep, and your heart got so slow, and slow is loud, Ethan, slow is the loudest thing in this building. It stops being a countdown and starts being an invitation, and I got halfway to the bed before I was awake. Hands, I saw now, were locked around her own knees, white-knuckled, the grip of a woman holding a railing over a drop. So I'm going to sit here, and you're going to go back to sleep, and we are both going to pretend this is dignified. What I did instead, and Dana can bill me, was get up, cross the room past every instinct evolution ever installed in me, and sit down on the floor next to the apex predator of the Tri-County area, close enough that our shoulders touched. Her whole body went rigid. I rolled up my sleeve, and she said, "Don't," through her teeth, and I said, "I'm not offering the wrist. I'm offering the schedule. Half ration, right now, by choice, mine and yours, and then you put your head on my knee and I talk until dawn, because the hungry thing hates my voice, you told me so, it can't hear a heartbeat properly while I'm talking over it." "That's not," she said, and stopped, and did the math, and the math, for once, came out on the side of the small thing instead of the strong thing. She fed for 3 seconds, off a 2-inch cut, and sealed it, and then Vivienne Hale lay down on the floor of a dorm room like a girl at a sleepover and put her head on my knee, and I talked. I recited the donor center orientation pamphlet from memory, contraindications included. I explained the cookie hierarchy, oatmeal for veterans, chocolate chip for first-timers. I did the plots of movies wrong on purpose so she'd correct me, and she did, every time, furious, half asleep, her ear against my pulse. And out in the hallway, some time before dawn, I heard June settle down against our door with a blanket, on self-appointed watch, our whole strange food chain stacked up in one corridor, each of us guarding the thing that could eat us. And out of every night of the apocalypse, that's the one I'd keep. New constitutions get tested fast. Ours lasted 2 days before the fence bell rang at dawn, and we went down, all of us, to find a dead man begging at the parking lot line. Trent Wexler had been returned. That's the professional word for it. He'd been bitten, precisely, once, in the shoulder, the way you'd notarize a document, and turned out into the open with his new vest gone and his clipboard. And this detail is the whole biography of Rex Calloway, his clipboard returned with him, with a single line added at the bottom in handsome handwriting. Asset depreciated. He was half through the turn, gray to the elbows, veins going dark at the throat, maybe an hour of Trent left in him, kneeling at the line he himself had negotiated, all of them, no exceptions. And he knew the rule was his, you could see him knowing it, and the dorm gathered on the steps behind us in a silence you could stand a spoon in, and nobody said bring him in, and nobody said good, and everybody thought both. He didn't beg well. Men like Trent never do, they negotiate, even on their knees. He led with intelligence. I know his numbers, I know the stadium, I counted the garrison, then with grievance, he threw me out like packaging. Then the black reached his collarbone, and he stopped negotiating, and looked straight at me, not at her, because even now he'd done the math on who was soft. "I asked you once, on the stairs, if I was on the list," he said. "You hesitated. I did all the rest myself, I know exactly whose it is. But I'm asking again anyway." And then he said the only true sentence he had. "I don't want to be a thing," he said. "I've seen what the vials make. It's still in the stadium, what's left of it, they keep it in the visiting team's locker room and it says your name, Ethan, it's the only sound it makes." He was crying now, which the turning makes strange, the tears go thick. "Don't let me be a thing that says your name." And there it was, in the gravel at the parking lot line. The whole question of me, kneeling in a ruined vest. Because the smart play was no. Dana said the odds out loud like a doctor should. A bite is not a scratch. June had been 3 tablespoons at a scratch. This needed real volume, my volume, days before a war, spent on the men who sold the war its map. Vivienne stood beside me with her arms folded and did the thing the new constitution required of her, which was nothing, out loud, at all. She just watched me, and underneath her stillness, audible only to me, who had learned to read her the way she read pulses, was the oldest fear in her file. "Every person you save loves you a little, and every drop is a day off my frost, and you are going to say yes anyway, aren't you? Because the yes is the thing I fell for. The yes is the mechanism." One sentence of warning, I said to her. That was our deal. Here's mine. I'm about to do the brave version. "I know," she said. 1:55. And she took my arm in both hands, and made the cut herself, her call, her blade clean nail, her tongue standing by to close it, rationing me like the treasury I was. And we gave Trent Wexler, trader, clipboard merchant, seller of my blood to the men who bid him, 1/2 cup of the reason to live. He came back the way June had, mind first, then color, and the imprint landed the way it always lands. His eyes found me and flooded. And I watched a man who had inventoried me as an asset for 2 weeks' experience, in real time, against his entire will, the conversion of that ledger into worship. I want to tell you it was satisfying, and I want to be the kind of person who didn't think so, and both of those people are lying. What he brought us was worth the 1/2 cup, and Vivienne, already at the whiteboard in her head, extracted it before he'd finished shaking. Rex wasn't planning a siege. He was planning a harvest, and he was planning it around our own calendar, because Trent's clipboard had recorded everything, the feeding schedule, the fence rotations, the pharmacy runs, and above all the pattern that mattered, that the Queen's power peaked feeding night and sagged lowest the morning of the next one, and that the Queen herself left the fence twice a week, at dusk, briefly, predictably, to walk the perimeter of the science building while Dana drew my checkup samples. The reason was the one weakness she'd ever confessed to a clipboard holder. She could not stay inside smell range of my open vein in anyone else's hands. Printed, timed, and sold as a window. A window. Recurring. Printed. Feeding night was tomorrow. I've wondered since whether that printed window was the real plan or the bait for the one that actually came. With Rex, the honest answer was always both. She wanted to cancel everything, freeze the calendar, weld me back into the suite. You could watch her want it. Her hand actually drifted toward where the index cards used to live. Instead she looked at the open door of the world with her jaw tight, and rebuilt the plan around the Constitution. Feeding moved up a day, tonight, full power now. The perimeter walk kept, but staffed, track team in the shadows, Marcus on the roof with the a cappella section. June assigned to me, arm's length, both of you inside the fence, not one step past the line, swear it, and I swore it, and I meant it. Keep that in mind for the next day and a half. The attack came the next night anyway, and it came wrong, which is to say it came smart. No garrison ranks at the gate. Fire, instead, at the north fence, the far corner, the athletic sheds going up all at once, dry wood and paint cans, lit by warm hands. His kept staff had walked the cans in ahead of the squad, because open flame is a tool the dead can't carry, and the low channel exploding with it. Because fire is the one thing that scrambles the dead, hers and his alike. It's older than the virus, older than everything, and every enrolled body on the north line broke formation at once and Vivienne went. Because 200 of hers were milling at a wall of flame and she was the only voice that could hold them, and it was the correct call, and it was the intended call. The snatch squad came through the southeast, over the loading dock, 6 of the curated dead moving in total silence with a wet tarp against the scent line, and they did not come for me. That's the part the clipboard never taught Rex, and the part I'll grant him he learned fast. They came for the dorm. For the doors. For the 40 warm reasons the Queen would trade anything to keep breathing, with cans of gasoline in their careful dead hands, and one of them, out front, in a letterman jacket with silver seams, carrying a road flare, unlit, like a conductor's baton. Rex had come personally. He stood at the parking lot line, on his side of it, mannered as ever, while his squad poured a glistening moat around the lobby doors, and the dorm screamed inside, and June screamed on the stairs. And 3 blocks north the sky glowed orange over the sheds where the queen of the campus was holding 200 panicking dead in a net made of her own voice, too far, exactly far enough, engineered. And he looked across the gasoline at me, and clicked twice, and made the offer he had built this entire night to make. Trade's still open, he called, pleasant, carrying the flare loose in his fingers. The bottle walks over the line, or the seller drinks the vintage. You have until she notices. Knowing her, that's not long, so, and he smiled with his excellent borrowed teeth, walk fast, juice box. Here's the thing about being a resource your whole life, about $35 and a cookie, about 17 weeks of a streak nobody watched. You get exactly one asset, and you spend your whole life learning its price, and then one night a monster in a letterman jacket stands across a moat of gasoline from everyone you know and tells you the price out loud. And it turns out to be 40 people, and a fence, and a girl 3 blocks away who is finally getting warm. That math resolves. It's the only math that night that did. June, I said, I need you to hold something for me, and I gave her my jacket, the one that smelled like every morning I'd ever been claimed, so the last thing I'd hear behind me wouldn't be her following. And I put one sentence of warning into the low channel the only way I knew how, out loud, to the burning air, knowing what carried and what didn't. Viv. I'm sorry. This is the brave version. And I walked across the parking lot line. They didn't grab me. Nobody laid a hand on me the whole way. Behind us, at the fence line, his squad was already rolling the gasoline drums back up into their truck, tidy as movers, because the moat had only ever been the price tag, and I'd paid it. The squad fell in around me at a respectful distance, an honor guard of the curated dead, and Rex walked beside me through the ruined streets making conversation, actual conversation, the score of last year's homecoming game, the architectural history of the stadium. And it took me 6 blocks to understand what I was feeling, which was that I had been claimed before, and this was the other kind. Vivienne's claim was a hand around something warm. His was a logo on a crate. "You're quiet," he observed, as the stadium lights rose over the rooftops. "Most people negotiate on this walk." "Most people have something you want," I said. "You've got me. I'm cargo." "Cargo," he said, tasting the word, and the click behind his voice did something almost like warmth. "You know, she'd have argued with that. She'd have said you're the treasury." I watched him step over a dead man's legs without looking down, mannered as a museum guide. "She always did have a gift for dressing up an asset as a cause. It's why she beat me in every election that mattered." He glanced at me, shine and seams under the floodlights. "I'm going to enjoy finding out what the cause tastes like from the source. The stadium at night, from the inside, is a place I will be describing to therapists for as long as I live, assuming either of those things exists again." The string lights were still up from homecoming, dead now. His garrison stood the ring in the dark, faced in, silent, hundreds of them, and between the goalposts, where a scoreboard should tell you who's winning, hung the wet tarp banners of his administration. And under the home stands, in the athletic department's sports medicine suite, the harvest was already set up and waiting for me. The measured version is this. It was clean. That was the obscenity of it. Added treatment table, 4 stands, coolers with the athletic department's logo, rows of blood bags flat and hungry in their racks, and 2 of his kept humans in catering aprons standing by with the equipment, because dead fingers can't thread a needle. And the humans wouldn't meet my eyes, and the older one, a woman with gray in her braid, whispered, "I'm sorry," while she tied off my arm, and did it well, and that's the sentence I'd put on the whole East Campus if I had to choose one. People who are sorry, doing it well. Rex oversaw the first draw personally, seated backward on a folding chair like a coach at practice, watching my blood climb the tube, and he explained his administration to me, because men like Rex cannot own a thing quietly. "Vivienne runs a sanctuary," he said. "I run a supply chain. She enrolls, I acquire. And you," he nodded at the bag, filling, dark, "are the single strategic resource on this board. Drunk fresh, you made her a weather system. Sewn into the seams, slow release, diluted, no messy attachment." He tapped his forearm where the silver line lay. "You made me this. So we industrialize. Draws on a schedule your little medic would approve of, storage, rationing. I seem a reserve before every engagement. In a month I don't need to beat her on an even night, because there won't be any even nights." He smiled his excellent smile. "You were wasted on romance, Ethan. Your infrastructure." Sometime on the second day, her marking faded off my skin the way it does, and nothing in that building so much as sniffed at me, which was its own education. Barrels eat what they smell. A garrison eats what it's permitted, and I was inventory now, which turns out to be the one thing safer than claimed. I hated how safe it was. "Here's what I said, with a needle in my arm, in the bowels of enemy country, because I had spent the walk over doing the only math I'm actually good at, which is what things cost." "Diluted," I said. His head tilted, a degree. "You said diluted, no messy attachment." I made my voice as bland as the juice they give you after. "Interesting word, no." She drank pints of me fresh and stayed herself, more herself, actually, sharper every time. "You dripped one thin dose through a seam because you were scared of it, and," I looked at him over the tube, politely, "how are the nights, Rex?" The room went very still. The woman with the braid stopped breathing entirely. Rex Calloway, president, apex of the East Campus, sat backward on his folding chair looking at me with the shine flat and unreadable, and behind the shine, for the first time, something moved that wasn't appetite. He stood, straightened his jacket, and left without a word, and the click of his footsteps down the concrete tunnel was, for 6 steps, very slightly irregular. Because I knew something he was working hard not to. I'd seen the finished product. They kept it in the visiting team's locker room, and it had a name once, the fastest of the row, and on my first night as infrastructure they walked me past that door, as a warning or a promise, and from behind the steel I heard it. Not moaning. Not scratching. Saying, patiently, forever, in a voice that had gone through desperate and come out the other side into something like devotion, my name. "Ethan." Pause. "Ethan." Pause. The way you'd say it into a phone that had stopped connecting years ago and you kept paying the bill anyway. That was taken blood, full strength, in an empty house. Rex had taken a thin dose into a house that was still furnished, and he was so proud of the dilution, and here is what the dilution actually bought him. The pull, in installments. I know because on my second night, and my third, and every night after, the door of my nice clean holding room, the equipment manager's office, cot, blanket, motivational posters about hydration, would open long after the last draw, no announcement, and Rex Calloway would stand in the doorway in the dark, not speaking. Not feeding. Standing, at the end of an invisible chain of his own tailoring, hating every second, his excellent jaw working around the one idea. And then the door would close and the irregular click would recede down the tunnel and stop somewhere out of earshot and, I'd have bet the treasury, turn around. The third night I set it into the dark before the door could close. It gets worse the more you take. You know that, right? The thing in the locker room used to give orders too. The door stayed open 1 second too long. Then, out of the dark, in the doubled voice, the crawlspace one underneath doing most of the talking, he said the only honest thing I ever heard from him. She got the version of you that gets offered, he said. Explain to me why. I was the one who was supposed to be inevitable. And the door closed, and I lay on my cot in the equipment office doing the arithmetic that would decide everything, and the arithmetic deserves daylight, because it's the exact opposite of a plan going wrong. Given, my blood built people. Taken, it built hunger with my name on it. Rex was taking, in dilution, on a schedule, and it was already standing in doorways at night. Which meant every additional drop was a vote. Thought he was stockpiling weapons. He was actually, drop by drop, seam by seam, electing me the president of whatever was left when Rex Calloway ran out. The trick, and it was an ugly trick, and I'd do it again, was to make him hurry. So I became the worst cargo in history. Not escape attempts, nothing that dignified. I reviewed him. Out loud. To the woman with the braid, at draw time, while he watched, in the mild voice of a customer, you know she never needed equipment for this, she uses her mouth, it seals as it goes, very efficient, this all seems like a lot of overhead. To the ceiling of the suite, conversationally, while the bag filled, she got stronger every single week on the fresh stuff, but sure, thimbles through a seam, that's basically the same. Rex directly, on the fourth day, when the draws were coming closer together and his knuckles on the chair back had begun, very quietly, to crack the folding metal. I'm just saying. The only body on this campus that's ever handled me at foolproof walk through a cinderblock wall about it, but you'd know best, you're the president. Dana would tell you I was weaponizing intrusive thoughts in a man with a substance problem. Marcus would tell you I was talking smack until the big kid swung. They'd both be right, and it worked better than either, and it worked because of the thing I knew from doorways and he refused to know, that the pull doesn't care whether you despise it. It compounds. He started skipping the dilution stages. I watched the coolers empty faster than any schedule. The seams at his wrists multiplied, silver lines like a barcode, and his garrison, out on the ring, started doing something garrisons must never do. Twitching. Holding formation with visible effort, like an orchestra whose conductor kept checking his phone, because his command channel and his one idea were now sharing a single crowded head, and every day my name took up more square footage in it. Her name was Renata. I learned it on the second day, along with the fact that whispering during a blood draw is the safest conversation on earth, because the dead guard at the door heard pulses, not consonants, and mine was already elevated on schedule. Renata ran the needles, and her Sam ran the recovery, juice, cot, blanket, blood pressure, and between the two of them they had turned the sports medicine suite into the only room in that stadium where the apocalypse kept office hours instead of just appetite. They were good at it in the way that broke your heart, because being good at it was the whole survival strategy. The useful ones stay warm, Sam told me, taping my elbow, in the voice of a man reciting the house rules of a fire. The trick is staying useful without becoming equipment. We've managed 3 weeks. He looked at the racked bags of me with a nurse's contempt for waste. You've managed 4 days, and you're already the whole pantry. I told them what I was doing to Rex. Not the mechanism, just the direction, make him hurry, make him sloppier, and Renata listened with her triage face and then said the smartest sentence spoken in that stadium all week. Sloppy cuts both ways, boy. A distracted warden forgets doors. A distracted warden also forgets to say don't eat the staff. So if you're greasing this hill, we're picking a night, and my people are using it before the slide gets away from you. Pick the 4th night. I contributed the only currency I had left, which was being fascinating. An hour after last draw, I told my door guard I wanted to see the president, urgent, a renegotiation. And by the time Rex arrived at my cot with his retinue and his hunger and his hatred of his hunger, half the patrol pattern of the North Concourse had rearranged itself around the honor of guarding our conversation. I kept him there 40 minutes. I have never worked so hard in a negotiation I intended to lose. I offered him schedules with decimal points, exclusive rights language Dana would have laughed at, a clause where Vivienne had to approve nothing. And he paced, and sneered, and counter-offered, and stood too close, and looked at my elbow on the beat of every fourth sentence, metronomic, helpless. And while the president of the East Campus was busy losing an argument with a bag of me, 12 human beings went out through the north kitchens, over the loading ramp, into the dark, carrying a hand-drawn map to a fence where the rule is you get to knock. Renata was not among them. I found out at the next draw, and I came off that table at her, or tried to, which with 2 bags gone looks like a kitten falling off a couch, and she caught me by the shoulders and set me back down with professional boredom. "Don't," she said. "I got on that bus for 1 person. You think I can't count to 2 now? Sam wouldn't leave the ones who can't run, and I don't leave Sam, and neither of us leaves the boy every dead thing in this building says grace about." She checked my line, wrote my pressure on her wrist in pen, and added, with the first smile I'd seen inside those walls, "Besides, somebody has to be holding the needle when your girl gets here. I'd rather it was a professional." Rex found out about the 12 at dawn, and I got to see, from one room away through a prop door, what management by appetite looks like when it's humiliated. He didn't rage at the staff. He couldn't afford to, the staff was load-bearing, and some cellar part of him knew it. Instead he came to me, because everything came to me now, that was the tide I'd been pulling for, and he stood at the foot of my cot with the doubled voice fully doubled and informed me that the schedule was accelerating, effective immediately, double draws. And that if I felt faint I could console myself that I'd personally emptied the kitchens of the only hands that knew how to make my recovery soup. And then he didn't leave. That was the escalation. The other nights he'd stood in the doorway, and the doorway had held him, some last parliamentary procedure in his head requiring the formality of a threshold. This time he came in. He stood over the cot, close enough that the cologne lost to the older smell, and his hand came up, slow, disowned, the hand of a man watching himself do it, and hovered over my forearm, over the vein his whole administration orbited. And his jaw worked, and the click in his throat sped up until it was almost a purr, and I lay there absolutely still, one thought wide, if he takes it now, Taken builds monsters, and there is no version of him that stops at a sip. He didn't take it. He took the doorframe instead, on the way out, one hand, casually, the way you take a phone number off a corkboard, except the frame came with him, wooden hinges and a fistful of cinder block. From down the tunnel I heard the wall get worse, and Renata appeared in the ruined doorway 30 seconds later, pale, and looked at me lying in the settling dust, and said, evenly, "Drink your juice, boy. Whatever race you're running with that man, I've seen his split times. Run faster." On the fifth morning, she leaned close over the needle and breathed the day's news. The garrison on the west ring stood watch facing slightly wrong, maybe 4 degrees, all of them, the way a clock runs slow. 2 of the curated officers, the ones he'd seemed with thin reserve when the draws doubled, spreading me through his command staff like a bonus, had walked off their posts in the night, unordered, and been found at dawn standing under my boarded window like carolers. The president had not come out of his room since the doorframe, but the draws were doubled again, which told you where he was aiming all this new hunger, and she filled the bag, and wrote my pressure on her wrist, and her pen pressed harder than usual. And I lay on my treatment table, gray as dishwater, down more volume than Dana would ever have signed off on, and I felt, of all the available things, hope, and that was of course when the sky outside the concourse went dark with one sound. A B-flat. Held. Rooftop to rooftop, closer, then answered from the south, then the east, the note passing around the stadium like a noose being sung. And under it, beneath hearing, in the floor and the table legs and my back teeth, the low channel arriving like a tide, and every dead thing in that building turned its face to the home gate at once. She did not sneak. She had 200 at her back and a fire behind her and a fence unguarded because of it, and she walked up the players' ramp into the floodlights with the mascot carrying her banner, which was my jacket on a mop handle. June had given it up for the cause. And she stopped at the 50, in the middle of his garrison's ring, in the dove-gray dress she had not changed out of since homecoming because she'd been at war since homecoming. And she looked, and I could see it even from the mouth of the medical tunnel where they'd wheeled me up as leverage, worn, patchy. The frost coming and going at her collarbones like a radio station at the edge of range. Feeding night had been 6 days ago. The warm patch, I'd learn, had reached her elbow. The rest of that arithmetic Dana handed me afterward, and it deserves reading aloud. 6 nights, 0 rations, the hunger climbing the whole way, and every one of those nights had ended in the same place, on the bike rack under my boarded infirmary window, guarding a room with nobody left in it. Because the serum needed 5 days and a war needed her sharp, and starving was the only whetstone she had left. Rex came down the home step seam to the throat, twice the reserve he'd planned because I'd talked him into hurrying, and even his walk was wrong now, powerful and syncopated, a metronome with a secret, and he called across the field in the doubled voice, "You're early, Viv. Had you modeled for tomorrow?" And Vivienne Hale, running on fumes and a warming wrist, 60 yards from where I lay strapped to a rolling table with tubes in both arms, said the sentence I would carve over the door of whatever we rebuild. "You have something of mine," she said. "And the grammar's about to get expensive." He laughed, clicked, spread his arms, and the ring came off the walls in ordered ranks, hundreds against her 200, and the last pitched battle of the campus began. And I watched it from a gurney like the world's most useless trophy, and I'm not going to pretend I followed it as tactics. I followed it as weather. Her track team hit their flank as one animal. His ranks folded and reformed with that horrible drilled crispness. The band, his band, tried the fight song and got 4 bars in before her a cappella section, on the away roof, sang over them, louder, our fight song, the same fight song. If you want to know what the end of the world sounds like, it's 2 choirs of the dead singing the same school anthem against each other in different keys while the living hide under bleachers. She was magnificent and she was losing. I could see it and so could he. The shout, the weapon that had knelt 300 at homecoming, came twice, and the first time it dropped his front ranks flat and the second time it dropped them to one knee, and there was no third time. And Rex's seams pulsed silver under the floods and he waded toward her through his own kneeling troops like a man walking up current, and the two of them met at the 30 and the sound was a car accident sustained for whole minutes, and she was giving ground, foot by foot. Toward the tunnel, toward me, which I understood, in one cold drop, was not retreat. She was losing on purpose in my direction, bringing the fight to the one supply line on the field. They came off the 30 in a tangle and hit the gurney rail, and the world was suddenly very close and very loud, her hand finding the strap over my chest and shearing it. His hand closing on the 4 stand and swinging it away into the dark like a javelin, and for one clean second the 3 of us were inside the same breath, the Queen, the President, and the Treasury, and Rex, seams blazing, pinned her arm to the rail with one hand, took my jaw in the other, cold, careful, proprietary, and made the last offer of his administration, to her, while holding my face, which tells you everything about who he thought he was talking to. "Neil," he said, and the doubled voice had gone almost gentle. "Neil, join the administration, and I'll keep him alive on a schedule. You can even visit, or stand there and watch me drink the cause dry, right now, in front of you, and find out what you are when the reason's gone." His thumb moved along my cheekbone, absent, horrible, a man checking fruit. "Either way, Viv, either way, I finally win one election." And I looked at Vivienne, pinned, patchy, furious, our whole new constitution in her eyes and one sentence of warning still owed to her from a parking lot, and I gave it. "Viv," I said. Brave version. And I turned my head inside his grip, which he allowed, because why not, what could the cargo possibly do, and I put my free arm up between us, wrist bare, needle bruises and all, offered, the way you'd hand someone a phone with their mother on the line. And I looked into the shine and the crawlspace behind it and said, clearly, so all of him could hear it, both tenants, "You've been stealing sips for a week and standing in my doorway like a kid outside a bakery. Enough. I'm offering. Freely. To you, Rex. Drink." Everything stopped. The battle noise kept going somewhere far away, but inside our breath, nothing moved. As the crawlspace surged toward my wrist, I watched it arrive in his face, the pull, compound interest on every stolen drop, the one idea in full session, and the president tried to slam the door on it, and the door, thanks to 5 days of hurry, was off its hinges. His mouth opened, his grip on her arm loosened, just slightly, redistributing, leaning, and his eyes, and this is the last human thing I ever saw Rex Calloway do, his eyes went wide with the specific horror of a man feeling himself say yes to the wrong thing in front of the entire school. Given builds people, I told you. That was always the mechanism. And there was still a person in there to build, one, buried, thin as a seam, the boy who ran for things because being voted for was the only proof he trusted, and my blood, offered, went looking for him like it goes looking. And the 2 Rexes, the one who wanted to own me and the one who suddenly, agonizingly, wanted to deserve me, met each other at full speed in one repaired body. And Vivienne Hale, who had been losing on purpose in my direction all night, took her freed arm, and reached into her dove-gray dress, to the inner pocket she'd had the boutique's ghost sew in for lipstick in a previous world, and drew out something that caught the floodlights. A syringe. Crude, cloudy, half-refined, 5 days of Dana's lab work, begun the hour I was taken, compressed into the one dose that existed, and she looked at me over his bowed, shaking, drinking shoulders. She asked the question with her eyes, because it was mine to answer. He was drinking from my arm, and I felt what it was doing, and what it was going to cost the drinker, and I am the one who decides what gets given. I nodded. She put it into the master seam at the base of his neck and pushed the plunger to the glass. I need to tell you what that syringe was, because it wasn't a cure, not yet. Dana had needed 10 days. Dana had gotten 5, and half a lab, and no sleep, and what came out of that was, in her own words, delivered later with a doctor's flat contempt for her own miracle, not medicine, an argument. Concentrated, half-refined, cloudy as dishwater. Not enough to make something human. Exactly enough to make the virus stop holding. And Rex Calloway was, more than any creature who ever walked, a thing the virus was holding. Curated parts. Silver seams. A body assembled out of donors on the sole authority of the hunger that stitched it, and my blood, offered, was already in him, going room to room, turning on lights, looking for the boy, and her syringe went into the seam behind it and started turning off the glue. He came away from my wrist and stood up very straight, which frightened me more than any of the roaring had. He stood the way you stand when a sound in your house is wrong. And then the first seam let go, along his shoulder, not gruesome, I won't make it gruesome, it was worse than gruesome, it was quiet, a stitch of silver light opening and something borrowed simply resigning. And Rex looked down at his own arm, at his excellent hands, and his face, seams unspooling up the throat of it, did the thing I will actually never forget. It looked relieved. Dana named the mechanism later, flat as ever. There had been almost nothing original left since the admin steps, one bad bite's worth of boy. The virus hadn't been holding Rex together. It had been holding him, instead of him. The garrison felt him go before he went. That's the mechanics of it. All those hundreds of soldiers were standing at attention inside his voice the way our 200 stood inside hers, and his voice was coming apart in real time, and command doesn't fade politely. It shorted. Whole ranks stumbled mid-formation like a stadium wave with a stroke in the middle of it, and then the drums stopped. And then every curated soldier on the field lost its president at the same instant, and what's left when you subtract the conductor from an orchestra of appetite is just the appetite. 300 of them. No orders, no ranks, no rules, one campus full of warm reasons to move, and the nearest warm reason, wired to a gurney at the mouth of the tunnel, was me. Viv, I said. The flood. I see it, she said. She was still holding the empty syringe. She looked, in a way she hadn't since the refrigerator, 22 years old. What happened next happened all at once, and I'm going to slow it down, because everyone in it earned the airtime. Flood came off the walls and down the concourse in a wave with no shape, and Vivienne stepped over my gurney, planted her feet on the tunnel's painted midline, and shouted. And I heard it fail. That's a sentence I never wanted to write. The shout that had knelt 300 at homecoming went out over that field and knelt maybe 40, the nearest 40, and the rest of the wave stumbled, slowed, and kept coming. Because 6 days of no feeding and a warm patch to the elbow had spent her all the way down, and she knew it before the echo died, and she did not look at my arm. What she didn't do deserves its own line. The most dangerous version of the oldest question of us was lying right there, tubes already placed, veins already open, one full draw from a boy already drained to gray. And it would have refilled her like homecoming, and there was a real number, Dana confirmed it later, white-lipped, a real number of heartbeats I had left to give, and it was not large. And she did not look. She reached back instead, wrapped my slack hand in her cold one, put her body between me and 300 incoming appetites, picked up a length of goalpost off the turf with her free hand, and said, in her step's voice, to the wave, absolutely broke, absolutely calm, come on, then. One at a time or all at once. He's mine, and I wasn't done being me yet anyway. She was going to lose. Everyone in the tunnel mouth knew the math. I lay there with my hand inside hers doing the one thing I could still do, which was witness, and that's when the campus we'd spent 3 weeks building arrived to collect on itself. It came in this order. First a B-flat, close, from the away roof, splitting into chords as the whole section slid down the aisle singing the fight song, Our Key. And the flood, drilled to that song by a dead band since day one, hitched, whole columns of it dragging half a step toward the sound out of pure muscle memory. And the floodlight bank on the west rim swung, actually swung, because Marcus was up there with 2 of the track team physically turning the housing, walling half the field off behind a cliff of glare. And then, running along the top of the home stands with a clipboard, screaming numbers, came Trent Wexler, pointing at columns, calling their drill patterns before they made them. They bank left at the 30, they always bank left. Third rank splits at the hash, seal the ramp, because he had counted this garrison for 2 weeks like the miserable meticulous man he was, and a decapitated army doesn't improvise, it runs its last drills forever, and no one alive knew its drills better than the men it had depreciated. Our 200 hit the flood's flank in formation at the 20. The track team ran the herd lines like sheepdogs. June appeared at my gurney with Dana, who began, under a stadium-sized brawl, with her jaw set and her hands perfectly steady, to run a field transfusion into me from a bag she'd carried in her backpack through a war, because of course she'd carried it, and here's where it came from. Rack Trent emptied had only ever been the account she showed people, the decoy balance, the one that existed on paper. There'd been a second one the clipboard never inventoried, behind the insulin in the crisper drawer, because Dana trusted clipboards exactly as far as she could file them, and the interest on that secret came due that night inside my own arm. But 2 of the flood didn't run anybody's drills, and those 2 very nearly ended everything that night. The carolers, pair of curated officers who'd walked off their posts to stand under my window, the ones with my name where their orders used to be, and drills don't hold a body whose entire remaining government is a cent. They came out of the wave at a diagonal, ignoring the light wall, ignoring the song, ignoring Vivienne herself, tracking one thing across that ruined field with the straight-line patience of compass needles. And Dana saw them first and said, in her flattest voice, which I had learned was her screaming voice, incoming, ours, well, yours. And June Park stepped in front of my gurney and took off her glasses. That's the detail the campus put in the song later, and the song is right. She folded them, set them on my blanket, said, hold these, apologized, to me, mid-apocalypse, sorry, this will probably look strange, and then our duckling grabbed the banner off the mascot, my jacket, 2 weeks of morning ritual soaked into the collar of it, and ran away, waving it straight across the open field with her scrawny arms over her head like a kid flagging a rescue plane, screaming the only war cry she had in her, which was, and every survivor of that night confirms it, he smells like this, boys, come and get it. They got it. Both compass needles swung off me and onto the moving flag of me, and June led 2 apex monsters on a serpentine tour of the entire East Concourse. A 5'0" freshman in big frame prescription lenses worth of blur, cornering like a shopping cart, apologizing to the architecture as she caromed off it, sorry, excuse me. Behind her, the fastest things Rex ever built ate her dust, and the drums came down, and Dana squeezed the bag into my arm with both hands. Marcus met her at the far ramp. She'd bought the field 90 seconds and spent every one of them, and when he swept her and the jacket up onto the rail with one arm, the carolers hit the ramp below at full stride, and found waiting for them the concourse doors, and Renata's aprons, and the bolts. She came back with my jacket held out at arm's length like something radioactive, took her glasses off my blanket, put them on, and stood there fogging them with her own breathing, and said, primly, to Dana, I'd like it noted in my exit interview that I feel better when I can hear him, and tonight that was useful. Then she sat down on the turf next to my gurney and shook for a while, and I got my hand on top of her head, doctor's orders be damned, and the duckling wore that like a medal through everything after. And the flood, funneled by light, pulled by song, cut by rank, folded by a queen on her last winter swinging aluminum like judgment, went down the throat of the player's tunnel in banked columns exactly as Trent called them, into the concourse ring. The doors of that ring, per his clipboard, locked from the outside. And the hands that threw those bolts wore catering aprons, Renata's people. The kept humans of the East Campus, locking the doors of their own keeping, on the night the keeping ended. It took until the sky went gray at the edges. When it was done, the field looked like the world's worst homecoming ever held, which it was, and the away stands held a sealed concourse full of leaderless dead pacing their last parade drills. And our people, dead and alive and everything on the spectrum we'd invented between, stood on the 50 in the kind of silence that has a heartbeat in it. And Vivienne Hale sat down on the turf next to my gurney all at once, like a marionette meeting its scissors, and started laughing, rusty, 2 notes, and then could not entirely stop. Put her forehead on the back of my hand, and her shoulders shook, and I'm told by witnesses I stroked her hair with an arm that had a transfusion line in it, which Dana permitted for the length of exactly 1 bag. Rex died at dawn. I'm not going to dress it up, and I'm not going to spend it cheaply either, because whatever else he was the other road, and somebody should write down where it ended. The seams had all let go by then. What was left on the turf under the dead string lights was not the catalog model. It was a 22-year-old with a bad bite that had never healed, small in the way that sick people are small, the original Rex, the one the virus had found on the admin steps on day 1 and offered the same deal it offered everyone. And he'd taken it the way he took everything, all of it, faster, at everyone's expense. My blood had gone looking for the person and found him. Her syringe had unlocked every door between him and himself. Between the 2 of us, we'd won, which meant between the 2 of us, we'd done this. I hold both of those. They don't cancel. He was conscious. That's the mercy and the sentence of it. Vivienne sat down next to him on the turf, in her ruined dove gray, and he looked up at her with ordinary brown eyes and said, in an ordinary voice with no click in it at all, the whole tragedy of Rex Calloway in 1 line. Was anyone going to vote for me, he said. Ever? Or was it always going to be you? And she was honest with him, which was the respect he'd never once paid her. It was always going to be me, she said. Not because of the frost, Rex. Before the frost, people handed me things because I saw them. You took things because they proved you existed. Nobody votes for a mirror. He thought about that for a while. The sky got lighter. Then he rolled his head, found me on the gurney, and mustered, from somewhere down in the original person, one entirely human, entirely Rex Calloway sentence, and I'd be lying if I said I don't treasure it. For what it's worth, he said, you'd have gotten my vote. Best tasting constituent I ever met. He didn't dissolve, or crumble, or any of the movie things. He just finished, somewhere between one breath and a scheduled next one that never called its meeting to order, with the string lights dead above him and, in the sealed concourse under the stands, 300 voters pacing out his last drills forever. We buried him at midfield, and June, who apologizes to furniture, found the words for the marker, and they were, Rex Calloway, President. He ran unopposed. Vivienne read it once and said, quietly, first true thing he ever put his name on, and we went home. I slept for 2 days. I know they were interesting days, because I kept surfacing into scenes like a man channel flipping through his own life. Dana's voice, explaining to somebody that the universal donor is the universe's worst planned joke, he can give to every blood type on Earth and receive from almost none of them, O negative only, 2 people in 100. So unless this dorm is hiding somebody, and then a pause with arithmetic in it, and then, quieter, seriously, all 3 of you. And the answer, which I heard with my eyes shut and have never gotten over, was Renata, braid over her shoulder, rolling up her sleeve while Sam ran the line with hands that remembered needles, and a freshman from the 2nd floor I had never once spoken to. And Marcus, enormous, sheepish Marcus, who had apparently known his blood type his whole life and never mentioned it during any of my 17 weeks of cookie commentary, saying, I don't like needles, man, but like, obviously, 2 in 100. And 3 of them stood in line at my bed. I gave to strangers for years at $35 a visit, and the return came back through the arms of a stadium prisoner, a stranger, and a man who once fought a vending machine. If you want the moral of the whole apocalypse early, it's in there somewhere, and I'm not going to be the one to pull it out and ruin the shape of it. And between the bags, in the hours nobody scheduled, there was Vivienne. The chair by my bed had become her office. She ran the campus from it in a whisper, June and Trent shuttling messages, because she would not use the low channel indoors anymore. It's rude, she said, he's resting. She fed me, and I mean fed me, spoon, bowl, blow on it first, glare, the entire production, iron stew from the cast iron pans her dead sprinters had looted in a previous geological era. And when I said, once, you know my arms work, she said, without looking up from the spoon, mine didn't, in a refrigerator, and somebody fed me anyway. Eat. At night, when she thought I was under, she'd stop pretending to read Dana's charts, and take my wrist in her cold hand, and count out loud, barely, a thread of a voice in the dark infirmary, 59, 60, 61, the way other people say a rosary. I let her think I was asleep for 3 nights. On the 4th I said, into the dark, without opening my eyes, you know there are easier hobbies, and her fingers went still on my pulse, and she said, unashamed, entirely herself, I like this one. It's the only number on this campus that's mine. On the 4th night she arrived at my bedside with a fresh index card, and my heart, the snitch, sped up at the sight of it, and she watched it do that with open enjoyment before reading the card aloud. Amendment 1. The sentence of warning arrives before the brave version begins. Not during. Not shouted over gasoline. Violations, and here she looked at me over the top of the card, billed in mornings. I asked what a morning cost these days. By way of an answer she set the card down, leaned over the transfusion line with all the patience the schedule could bear, and conducted the full ritual right there, hospital corners and all, slow, unhurried, thorough, collarbone to jaw, until the monitor Dana had rigged embarrassed me at volume in front of the whole infirmary. Then she straightened my collar, patted it flat, and said, that's one. You owe me roughly 1,000. Out in the hallway, June's patrol went past at double speed. I was awake, barely, propped in a wheelchair against medical advice, for the first walkout, and it deserves the airtime more than my recovery does. Day 3 after the battle. The concourse doors, opened exactly 1 body's width. Trent at the gap with his clipboard, calling the drill pattern so they'd exit in the order their old training preferred, and the first one out was a curated sergeant in a stitched letterman, big as a door, hands the size of my future. It stepped into the daylight of the 50-yard line where its president was buried and stood there, unled, unaimed, empty as a Sunday campus, waiting for a voice. And the voice it got was Vivienne's, patchy, warming, half-strength and entirely certain, and what she said became the form we used 100 times after. She didn't command it. Commands were the old management. She stood in front of a monster assembled out of theft and asked it the enrollment question, the one June swears she suggested and Dana swears she drafted and Vivienne maintains she improvised, which was, simply, What did you do before? And the sergeant stood in the sun working its ruined jaw for 10 whole seconds, dredging the basement of itself, and finally produced one word: groundskeeping. And Vivienne said, "Wonderful, we have leaves, follow the rake," and the first soldier of the East Campus Army shuffled off to find the rake, and behind it the doors opened another body's width. That was the amnesty. No trials, no kneeling, one question and a job, and Trent stood at that gap calling patterns for 6 hours a day like penance had finally found a format that fit him. And I sat in my wheelchair watching an army get taken apart one job title at a time, and thought about how her first government had started the same way, on a dorm lawn, with names. There was one door in that stadium the amnesty couldn't process with a question, and on the 4th day I made them take me to it. The visiting team's locker room. Vivienne fought me on it with everything short of index cards, and lost to the same argument that had opened my own door, and so I sat at that steel threshold in my wheelchair with my palm already cut, and they slid the bolt. What was left of the fastest of the row came into the light on its ruined joints, and stopped, and said it. "Ethan." I held out my open hand. Given builds people, that was the whole gospel, and I had to know, and here's the truth I carried out of that room. There was no person left to build. Dana had been right about the empty house, but the gift went looking anyway, the way it goes looking, and what it found instead of a man was the noise, and it turned the noise off. Drank from my palm like the first water after a fever, and the reaching went out of it, and my name stopped, and it lowered itself to the concrete with something I can only call punctuality, a creature released at last from an appointment, and finished. We buried it at midfield the next morning, beside its president, and the digging was done by Trent, who had not been assigned. He was out there at dawn with a spade and his vest off, and when it was done he stood over the 2 graves of the administration that had made him an asset and then depreciated him, and laid his clipboard in the ground with them, and walked back inside to call the drill patterns. That's the whole story of Trent Wexler, told properly. Some men need to watch a thing get buried before they can put it down. The 2 carolers were the last open file. There was no job to hand back to bodies whose entire remaining government was a smell, so they stand honor guard at the clinic now, outside the donor chair, facing in, calm as furniture, while I bleed on schedule. Everyone agrees it's unsettling. Nobody has had the heart to end it, least of all Vivienne, who maintains they're the only 2 on this campus with taste. 3 weeks is what it took, in the end. 3 weeks for me to get my color back and the campus to invent its new normal, and I'll give you the rest of the montage at reading speed. The 12 from the North Kitchens, it turned out, had made our fence the very night they ran, all 12, knocked like civilization, and were breakfast regulars now. 2 of Vivienne's old courts surfaced at the fence that same week, Chelsea among them, alive, unbitten, and still, for reasons nobody pursued, carrying handcuffs, and Vivienne enrolled them on probation and assigned them, with surgical justice, to the laundry. The donor program, Dana's Cathedral, a sign-up sheet in the dining hall under the only law this campus has, by gift only, and a waiting list, an actual waiting list of the living, volunteering their arms to bring back the dead one mind at a time. Because it turned out my blood was the best argument but not the only one. Any blood freely given argues, mine just argues loudest. Every cured soul waking up imprinted a little on their donor, which the campus has decided to call, because June named it before Dana could stop her, being somebody's duckling. Or worse civic religions. Attendance is excellent. And 3 weeks for Dana to finish what 5 days couldn't. The real thing this time. Refined, clear as water, 1 full dose, rated by its maker, in her flattest voice, for somebody who's already half argued back, and everyone in the infirmary knew there was exactly one somebody on campus fitting that description. And Dana set the syringe in its little steel cradle in front of Vivienne Hale and walked out of the room and made everybody else walk out too, including June, who patrolled past the door only 9 times. Here's where the arithmetic of her had landed, because we'd kept our constitutional promise, truth on schedule, and I knew every number. Warm Patch owned her left arm to the shoulder and had opened a second front along her collarbone. The frost still came when she called it, but it came the way a retired champion comes to charity matches. She hadn't fed in 3 weeks, her call, she'd looked at me gray in a transfusion bed and put herself on a ration of 0. And the hunger, she said, had gotten quieter as the warmth spread, not louder, which Dana's charts confirmed and which she reported to me with the wary suspicion of a woman whose oldest enemy had started sending gifts. So the syringe wasn't really a question about a virus. Everyone understood that. It was a question about which of the 2 things she'd been since a refrigerator in October she was going to be permanently, and she took the question up to the dorm roof at dawn. And I went with her, because the Constitution says I get a sentence of warning and she'd given it, 1 line, at my bedside, with the cradle in her hands. Roof. Brave version. We sat on the ledge with our feet over the 50-foot drop she'd once monitored from a bike rack, and the campus did its new morning underneath us, track team on their loops, a duckling procession carrying spinach. One of the gentled concourse dead raking leaves in the exact pattern it had raked them in life, and she held the syringe up against the sunrise and looked through it like a lens. "State the case against," she said. "Somebody has to, and if it's me it'll sound like I'm asking permission." "Okay," I said. "The case against. The frost has stood between this dorm and everything with teeth since day one. Rex is gone but the world isn't, there are other stadiums, other roads up the mountain, and the day something comes over that fence, a queen wins and a girl doesn't. That's the case." "It's a good case," she said. "It's a great case," I said. "Now the case for." And she was quiet a second, rolling the syringe between her fingers, and then Vivienne Hale, boss of the campus dead, terror of the eastern seaboard, laid out the case for, to the sunrise, in the voice with no cards in it. "I have held things my whole life," she said. "Held the sorority, held the councils, held the fence, held the room, held you. I am unbelievably good at holding. It's the one skill this world ever paid me for, alive or dead. And every single thing I ever held, I held because some part of me was certain that the second my grip opened, it would leave." She turned the syringe once more, and then a boy in a refrigerator put his hand against my mouth, his open hand. "Ethan, the one part of you with no grip in it at all, and it's the only thing anyone ever gave me that stayed without being held. So that's the case for. I would like to find out what I am with my hands open. I would like to be chosen on ordinary mornings by somebody free to leave, instead of guarded by somebody I could catch. And if the day comes that something crosses the fence," she looked down at the campus, at the ducklings, at the leaves being raked into last year's pattern, "then it can meet what this place actually runs on, which was never my weather. It was your arm, and the sign-up sheet behind it. It was always the arms." I didn't say anything to that, because there was nothing worth adding and it wasn't mine to sign. That was the whole point of everything, and we both knew it, and she smiled at me sideways for exactly that reason, and rolled up the sleeve on her warm arm herself, and did it the way she did everything, cleanly, on the first try, no ceremony, thumb to the plunger, in. Can tell you what it looked like, losing a superpower. It looked like nothing. That's the joke and the mercy of it. No light, no scream, no movie. The frost at her collarbones went out over about a minute, the way frost actually goes, from the edges, apologetically, and the shine at the back of her eyes banked itself down to 2 ordinary browns. And the last thing to go was the cold of her hands, which I held while it left, so I can tell you the exact moment Vivienne Hale's fingers turned warm for good. As I was holding them, and the low channel underneath the campus went quiet around her like a tide leaving a bay, and 200 enrolled dead lifted their heads all at once, felt the door of her voice close forever, and, this is confirmed by every witness on the quad, bowed once. The whole lawn of them, to the roof, unprompted, and then went back to raking, and running, and holding their one long safe note, because habits are the last government, and hers had been kind. She sat there in the sunrise as a warm, mortal, 22-year-old woman with no army, no channel, no frost, and the grip strength of a girl who does yoga sometimes. And I watched her check each empty room where power used to live, one by one, and come back from the tour with dry eyes and one piece of luggage. "Well," she said. "That's that." She flexed her warm hands, studying them. Then she looked at me, and there it was, unchanged, undiluted, moved intact from the monster to the girl like the one heirloom saved from a fire, the look. The reserved table, the claim. "Oh, don't misunderstand," said Vivienne Hale, retired boss, in the sunrise, reading my face like a menu. "The virus is gone, sweetheart. I'm still exactly who I am. I know your resting pulse to the digit and your schedule to the minute. I will still know within 1 hour if some duckling looks at you with intent, and the morning ritual is staying, not because the horde needs it, but because I like how you sound when your knees stop working. The only thing that syringe changed," she stood, brushed off the dove gray, and held out one warm hand to pull me up, "is that now, when I keep you, it's manners. Which brings me to this morning, and then I'll let you go. This morning the coffee cart reopened. Marcus runs it, aprons and all, off a propane burner and looted beans, and the whole campus lined up, the living, the cured, P.D. Alvarez with his insulin cooler clipped to his belt like a sheriff's badge. The staff mother from the 4th floor, whose kid runs the juice table at the clinic now and hands you your cup afterward with the solemnity of a notary, one gentle tuba player who doesn't drink coffee but holds a cup for the warmth. And I was standing at a table with my discount noodles and my completion streak posture, 20 years old, alive against every actuarial table in this hemisphere. Then the Queen of Nothing walked up in her ordinary clothes with an iced coffee I know for a fact she didn't want, stood close, met my eyes, and tipped it, deliberately, all over my shoes. "Sorry, Ethan," she said. 3 years, 2 apocalypses, 1 refrigerator, and this time I did not flee the building. I looked down at my ruined shoes, and up at the girl who bought my whole heart once with 2 syllables and had just offered, in front of the entire surviving world, to buy it again, and I said, no worries. And then I said, actually, hang on, one correction. And I kissed her, in the coffee line, to sustained applause and 1 B-flat, and her hands came up warm against my jaw, both of them, holding nothing, holding everything, and Marcus, from the cart, called out that this was better than the involvement fare. June sighed the sigh of a duckling who has made her peace, and somewhere under the applause Vivienne murmured against my mouth, 155, and she was right, as usual, about my exact heart. And then a cured sophomore from the amnesty, some other donor's duckling entirely, reached past the applause to leave a shy extra cookie at my elbow. Vivienne, warm, human, retired, picked it up without breaking eye contact with the girl, ate it in 2 bites, and smiled the way Frost used to form. Some institutions survive any government. I still run the donor chair at the campus clinic, twice a week, whenever the generator allows. I still go. Longest streak on record, though the pay's gone downhill, no $35 anymore, no cookie. Just a campus full of people who are alive because somebody opened a vein on purpose, and a warm girl who sits beside the chair every single time, holding my free hand, counting, out of nothing but choice. Turns out that was the exchange rate all along. Everything I ever gave away came back with interest, and everything anyone ever tried to take rotted in their hands. And if you told me all of that in week 17 of my streak, strapped to a chair at the end of the world for $35, I'd have laughed at you. Finish the bag anyway, and honestly, that's the entire secret. Finish the bag anyway.
I keep arguing with myself about which moment in this one was actually the dangerous moment, and I keep losing to myself, which is embarrassing. My first answer is the cold room, obviously. A kid drags a scalpel across his own palm for a girl who is 90 seconds from being a monster. That's the recklessness the whole story swings on. But then I remember the roof, and the case against, because she made the case against herself better than her enemies ever made it, and he just sat there and refused to co-sign either verdict, and she pressed the plunger with her own thumb. And I think that second one scares me more. Cutting your hand open for someone is 1 bad minute of courage. Handing someone the syringe that decides what they are, and keeping your mouth shut while they choose, that's a courage you have to renew every single morning, forever, with no applause and no cookie. Everybody wants to know if they'd have bled for somebody in the refrigerator. Fine question. Here's the harder one, and I genuinely don't know my own answer yet. Could you sit on the ledge next to everything you're terrified of losing, and let it decide for itself what it's going to be?